What's up, guys? How's it going? June? Eric, what's up, man? Good stream tonight. It's definitely a pleasure. Always a good time hanging out with you, buddy. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. It was definitely fun hanging out and catching up a little bit on what we may or may have missed out on and getting hyped up about the events that are coming up this weekend. We got some pretty cool stuff going on between going out to Fishtoberfest that Kenny and the Portland group is putting on, and of course you got Aquashella in the Chicagoland area, so should be a good time. I was trying to get a video of my old clownfish to play. Looks like it may probably not cooperate here. Looks like it's cutting in and out a little bit. Um, Hopefully it's playing a little bit smoother for you guys. I expect not. But that's actually, since my first saltwater tank I set up was a 72-gallon bow front that I picked up from somebody and threw a bunch of rock in and whatever substrate they had with it. And so that's a pair of clownfish in a basically like a 3.5-inch PVC end cap, and they decided to spawn away. So they spawned a few times. I ended up pulling some of the larvae out and raised them up. It was quite a headache, though. It involves a hell of a lot of live foods. So it was tough. You have to run live foods to feed your live foods, and then you feed the live foods to the fry as often as possible, which means is you feed them, see what they eat, suck out the whatever's left over on the bottom, feed them again a little bit later, rinse and repeat. So it was fun. It was cool to say that I did it once. Like I said, it was a pain in the neck, and I don't know if you're just doing Oculus or something super simple, probably not worth the effort and the time based on the reward as far as time and finances. But to say that you did it definitely was a good experience. If you were to get into some of the cooler clownfish that draw a little bit more money, it might be worth your time. But I had a friend that kind of got on a little bit larger scale breeding clowns and the more common stuff. You know, the shops can buy them wholesale than you can even afford to try to raise them. So they generally will just buy them from the supplier, and it's a money losing adventure. That's for sure. Like I said, unless you get into the higher end stuff where once you get past the initial investment of the fish and equipment to get moving, you actually see a little more return, and it's not just the cost of your time. How many did I end up with? I only raised, so they have fairly large spawns, so they will throw a lot of eggs. I only raised maybe a handful. Like I said, it was the first time that I had bred anything saltwater, and breeding saltwater stuff outside of like clowns and cardinal fish wasn't super big at the time. Um, so it was kind of a did it once to say I did it and learned as I went. I didn't raise up large groups of them. Like I said, the friend of mine that I had that got into it a little bit more, he would raise hundreds of clownfish. And with clownfish, they're damsels, right? So they're just assholes by nature. They generally tend to get along with fish from the same spawn, but outside of that, you may have a hard time. That's why you don't usually see a large group of clownfish in a tank very often. And if you do, it's because somebody got them straight from the breeder and they bought a large group. So I had a friend that had I think it was a 210-gallon setup for a while, and he bought a large group of like 20 or 30 from the guy that we knew that was in town that was breeding them. So he had a big clownfish tank with a bunch of different, mostly bubble tip anemones, anemones, uh, bubble tip anemones, and a large group of clownfish. So that was pretty cool to see. As I said, you don't see that very often. So the I live nearby Omaha in Nebraska, about an hour away. The Henry Dorley Zoo there has an awesome aquarium. Um, for not just a dedicated aquarium, for an aquarium inside a zoo, it's super awesome. And they've got a tall tank. It's probably maybe 3, 4 feet wide, and I would guess 6 feet tall. And all it is clownfish and anemones, and it's a ton of anemones, and they may have a couple tangs in there, like a blue tang or a hippo tang. So it was super cool. It's in the gift shop area. It was like a their Nemo tank, whatever. But it's awesome to see a large group of clownfish like that because most of the time in our tanks every day, as far as saltwater goes, you're used to seeing a pair maybe. So it's pretty awesome to see a large group. So if you ever have the opportunity to hit up the Henry Dorley Zoo in Omaha, there definitely go into the aquarium and check out some of the tanks there. Mitch and Tim both work at the aquarium there. Super good guys, and the club that I was with for a little while, based out of South Dakota, we actually got to take a tour down there and see some behind the scenes stuff, which was super cool to see how they quarantine their fish and hold fish to either transport to a different zoo or aquarium or to bring them in. So that was pretty awesome to see. I know if you guys know Austin from Fantastic, he's got his channel. He actually got married at the aquarium in the Henry Dorley Zoo there in Omaha. So they do have a big. It's God, that tank. They have a special events area, and the tank is probably 14 feet tall and maybe 30 feet long, and I would guess 3 to 4 feet front to back. And it's super cool. Like I said, you could have your event hosted there. You can do weddings, like company parties and stuff. So that was pretty neat. Zen Ginger, what's up? Swampy, how you doing tonight, man? Hope you're doing well. Just playing. Well, hopefully, I think it's a little choppy, so I'll probably kill it in a minute because it doesn't look like it's getting much better. Not smoothing out any. But again, this is just a video of some clownfish that I had. This was back in 2013. That I was just spawning a little PVC end cap, and all I did was uh, feed them frozen foods, and then they prepared food. So I fed some flakes and some pellets as well. But a lot of frozen foods like mysis. And again, so with clownfish, generally speaking, they can change genders. But the small one is the male, and the female's the much larger one in this case. And if for whatever reason the female were to die, um, then the male would become the female, and they'd find a new partner, right? So they can change sexes from male to female. Um, kind of cool. And then other inhabitants in this tank, you can see a dwarf angelfish, a firefish poking around, and then a couple yellow tangs. And I believe at this time there may have been I think it's a lawnmower bunny in there somewhere. Again, the video's fairly choppy. Definitely wasn't a display tank by any means. It was a display as in the sense that it was the biggest tank I had there at the time in my living room. But it was my first little venture into saltwater, so it was a learning experience. And it was definitely cool to see and get my feet wet, so to speak, with regards to getting into saltwater. And saltwater back then. This was, like I said, 10 years ago. Equipment. I was on a budget. I was right out of college. Didn't really have a great job yet, so I was buying stuff used and as cheap as I could. So I ran two 250-watt metal halide bulb or light fixtures over this with some cheaper reflectors. And back in the day, now LEDs, it's more about the optics that you put on the LED, right? Because the lens that you put on an LED can focus that light so that you get more useful light down in the tank and you don't get so much light bleed. And now you can many light fixtures, you can swap out the lenses on each individual LED or each bank of LEDs. Otherwise, if you can't, those little shades, like for the Chihiros lights, they have shades, or kind of like they look like blinders. I believe ADA has the same thing for their RGB solar. But back in the day when I was running metal halides, it was all about the reflector, and you can actually lose or gain a lot of useful light in your tank from using a quality reflector. So anymore nowadays, I don't know if anybody in their right mind runs metal halide lights because metal halides kind of like the old compact fluorescents or even T5s. Metal halides put off a ton of heat. They produce some cool light, and you do get that it's a point light source, so you do get a super cool shimmer, and they come in a variety of color temperatures. So you had a lot of options, and metal halides were kind of the thing to use for a while in reefs. Over this tank, like I said, this was a 72-gallon tank. I ran two 250-watt bulbs. That's 500 watts of light, and it throws a lot of heat. Oftentimes, over a reef, you'll see that they enclose the top of it to hide their equipment, so that you can see a little bit. It's just a nicer overall presentation. So when you put those metal halides, these big heat producing lights in there, and then you put a canopy over it, it traps that heat in there. So they got fans all over the place trying to keep it cool, and then you run chillers. So you used to run a chiller to cool the tank, because between your pumps, you have a pump for your protein skimmer, a pump for your return pump, or for your return pump running from the sump back up to the display. You'll have heaters if you need a heater for any reason, depending on the temperature of your tank. And then you'll have these big metal halide lights and some power heads, and all those things are putting off a bunch of heat. So you'd run a chiller to keep the tank cool, even though saltwater tanks generally run a little bit warmer than the majority of our freshwater tanks. Saltwater tanks tend to get hot due to all the extra equipment that you have putting off that heat, and those big metal halide bulbs. So it was interesting enough, like the late 20 teens, right? So 2013, 14, 15, they started switching over to some much higher end LED fixtures. And when they did that, a lot of people thought that you'd see cost savings running the LEDs, since it was, expected that the LED would be a little bit more efficient, and that they'd consume less power to get equivalent light. And it was interesting. I went to a couple lectures about lights in reef tanks when LEDs up, and there the camera goes. Um, I went to a couple lectures that some reef keepers gave about LED lighting, and interesting enough, the energy saving or the cost saving from switching from metal halides to LEDs didn't actually come from the light actually consuming less power. It came from the LEDs putting off less heat, so they didn't have to run a chiller, or at least run a chiller as often. So it was cheaper to run LEDs, but not necessarily for the reasons that people initially thought. So initially, people thought, like I said, that it'd be less power consumption from the light itself, but instead, they were seeing similar power consumption as far as LEDs versus metal halides to achieve the same values as far as PAR. PAR, like I said, photosynthetically active radiation. We care about that with our plants. That's the same light measurement that we generally look at with regards to corals. In fact, um, reef guys pay a lot more attention to PAR than plant guys, and then plant guys slowly started realizing that we could use PAR to measure things and check it out. So yeah, and nowadays, you know, really nice LED lights used to be super expensive, and there are still super expensive LED lights out there. However, you can get uh, a lot higher quality fixture that produces, much more appealing light with a lot more options for much more affordable prices anymore these days. June asked if marine lights are better than plant lights or better color range. So generally speaking, depending on the types of corals you keep and your goals for the tank, a light designed for a reef tank will have higher power out or higher PAR output, so it will be brighter. It's going to provide more light for corals. Corals generally tend to be a little bit more demanding as far as light requirements than plants do. So whereas an average planted tank around the substrate, you're usually looking at, for like a medium light tank, you're looking at like 30 to 50 par, and then like you get into 60, and you're starting to get into a little bit higher light for most planted tanks. Um, Whereas like a coral tank, you're looking at probably 100 par on the substrate, right? So probably like 2 to 3 times as much light in a similarly sized tank to grow some of your corals. And then obviously, like you get into your higher end corals or your clams, clams actually require a lot of light. So you'll see if you ever look at a lot of people share their reef tanks and their builds and stuff. When you see that, you'll often see that they'll post par numbers like all around the tank. So they'll build their rock work that they want to build their reef on, and then they'll use a par meter and they'll check par at the substrate across the whole length of the tank, and then they'll check like 6 inches up on the rocks, check up higher. And what that does is you can kind of take a uh, general idea of, okay, this coral needs maybe 100 par, so I can put this. It's fairly safe to put this coral over here. This coral may only need like 60 par, so you might put that down over in one of the shaded corner areas, and that can help you increase the odds of success with your corals. Now, in a planted tank, we don't necessarily pay as much attention to par because the requirements are just a little bit lower, and most light fixtures provide sufficient amount for a wide variety of plants these days. They didn't used to back when you were using T8s or normal output T5s, um, even into like the compact fluorescence. But these days with LEDs, most light fixtures produce a ton more light than they used to, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So we don't pay so much attention to it. Generally speaking, um, with regards to a wide variety of plants that we often see, most people have no problem getting sufficient amount of light to light a planted tank. Now you mentioned color range. Usually, a planted tank is going to be more like your daylight type color range, like so a little bit more of a true white light. You may be like 6,700 Kelvin up to maybe 10,000 Kelvin. So that's like your daylight range to maybe your bright white range. And a lot of planted tanks these days to enhance the colors and bring out some of the oranges and reds, they'll actually go down into like the 3,000 Kelvin range. And don't confuse that with the Kelvin is simply the color temperature or the apparent temperature to the human eye. Don't confuse that with the spectrum because spectrum is quite different than the temperature itself. And then you'll get down into, like I said, the 3,000. You get down to 3,000 Kelvin, so that's pretty warm. It's gonna be like an orange, red, almost a pink glow. Um, and then your coral tanks, generally speaking, like on a saltwater reef tank, in order to get that, the real like neon type colors, we're not really looking for so much like the natural, like daylight. We like to see those corals pop. We want to see so use actinic lighting, so like a blue type lighting. It makes the corals glow a little better, so they'll show a little bit more color. So use like a 12,000 Kelvin up to maybe 20,000 Kelvin. So that's going to be a lot more blue in color. And like I said, that brings out the brighter colors of the coral, and induces a little bit of that like biofluorescence type deal. So to answer your question, are marine lights better than plant lights? Anymore these days, a lot of them are actually quite similar. So a few years, well, several years ago, um, a lot of people started using black box reef lights. This is basically a cheaper Chinese light that happened to put out a boatload of power, and you could get it really cheap. Well, once people started experimenting with planet tanks a little more and figured out that they could get some more color and growth by increasing the light to, what some people may have considered as absurd amounts of light, they started to start looking into some of the reef lights, like the Chinese black boxes. They're like, well, that's a little bit blue, so they started just swapping out colors on the lights as far as the actual individual LEDs, and they were able to produce a color aesthetic that was a lot more pleasing to the eye while still getting a ton of power. Um, so are marine lights better than plant lights? Generally, I would say they're more expensive because they're going to be higher power, generally a little bit more adjustability. But anymore these days, a lot of planted tank specific lights have all the adjustability that you see in some of the real high end marine lights. You're just seeing less power output as far as usable light for photosynthesis. Swampy said uses grow lights. So grow lights and floodlights are common. Floodlights are just generally like white. Again, ranges anywhere from a lot of the times you see like 5,000 to 10,000 Kelvin. So that's that color temperature. So 5,000, the lower you go, the more yellow, orange, red it's going to be. The higher you go, the more into like a bright white, cool white, blue white kind of range. So your floodlights are generally like the 5,000 to 10,000 range, and Usually a cheap light that puts out a cheap fixture that puts out a bunch of light, and they work. It said, as the name suggests, it's a floodlight. So if you don't mount that light down close to the surface, you're going to have a lot of light spill, and that's where um, that light you're losing that light. It's going to just fill up the room, and it may be fairly undesirable. So you see people put a canopy over it. Um, like I said, you can put reflectors over it or shades to kind of try to focus that light a little bit. Um, Otherwise, on some of the higher end LEDs, like I said, you can actually change the lenses on the LED fixtures. So you can go anywhere from like a 180-degree beam, where that light is really spread out. If you want that light down near the surface, you can spread that out. Otherwise, you can narrow it down to like 120 degree, or even like a 90 degree, where you're focusing that light down right down into the tank, which can be highly desirable. If you like to keep If you like the aesthetic of an open top tank, a lot of people like to suspend their lights fairly high up over the tank. That allows you to work in the tank easy. It just gives it a clean look, but you're still focusing that light down into the tank, and getting some useful power out of it. Oh, Swampy said no heat comes off my lights. Yeah, so it just depends on the light fixtures, right? Like a lot of the LEDs now are fairly efficient, and the biggest enemy, I'd say, of LED longevity is heat. So you get some fancy heat sinks on some of these, and fans often to blow some air over those fins to keep those LEDs cool, because the more power an LED consumes, like if you have a 1 watt LED, it's not going to throw a ton of light. And generally, you'll see light fixtures that have a ton of little LED lights. They're generally like 1 watt or even less. As you get more powerful, you get into like some of the nicer Cree light LEDs are 3 watts. They're going to throw a little bit more power, and then you can get actual pucks that have it's an array of diodes and not just single LEDs. Um, but the higher power the LED is, and the more you crank that up, since it's adjustable, if you run it a little bit brighter, it's going to create a lot more heat. And if you don't have a quality heat sink and some fans to help draw that heat away from those LEDs, you can actually shorten the life of your fixture. Uh, so if you are running an LED fixture at like 100%, you can expect to see generally a shorter lifespan out of it compared to if you ran it at 50% maybe, and that's largely just due to the heat. 14 to 16 hours. Yeah, there's a so I, there are several companies that used to be big into aquarium lights, and they made really quality products. If you're familiar with Rapid LED, it's a lot of like DIY type kits, where you build it yourself. Otherwise, there was Build My LED, and they were both big into aquarium lighting until the legalization of growing marijuana and stuff started getting more popular. And then they realized that there was a lot more money to be made helping people grow marijuana than there was growing aquarium plants. So they ditched the aquarium trade a little bit, or sold off, a part of their company that focused on that, and then they shifted their focus largely towards grow operations. So that's awesome, Swampy. I haven't looked at your channel a whole lot. I need to. I'd imagine you probably have some videos and pictures of the setups that you use. So I'd be interested to take a look at that and actually see your setup there and what you got going. So June said the glass on her 75 is slightly tinted and it throws the color off. Is there a way to adjust for that? So a lot of the times, uh, in like older tanks or a little bit cheaper tanks, they have a higher iron content in the glass than something like a fancy, like if you pay the money for like a nice UNS tank, or often you'll hear it referred to as starfire glass or low iron glass. It's going to have lower iron, so it'll increase the clarity, and you won't get that green tint to it as bad. So that to compensate for the green tint through that lower quality glass, you can tweak your LEDs. So like I have over my 125 right now, I have three prisms by Nylock G, and it's a array of various colored LEDs, and they're on two separate potentiometers to ramp them up or or bring them back down. So you can adjust the color to your liking that way a little bit. Yeah, green grayish. Pretty similar. Like I said, it just depends on the iron content in the glass, right? So the best way to compensate for that. Um, I mean, if you want like really high clarity and real quality like color rendition, that'll be obviously just get higher end glass. Like I said, that is referred to as like starfire, low iron. Otherwise, just to try to compensate, you can get LEDs that have multiple adjustable channels, so that you can fine tune the color to your liking. So a lot of the times when you're looking at light fixtures, and let me see, I think Dennis has an article. I'm going to share this with you guys. So Dennis Wong, from the 2 Hour Querist, he's become real popular in probably the last 5 years. Super cool. He has an article about CRI. So CRI is the color rendering index, or basically how accurately a light depicts like true colors, and largely related to white. So I'll post that link there. Um, and so lights are generally rated, they'll have a CRI, or a color rendering index. And the higher that number, the more accurately that color or that light will portray colors. So if you have like a CRI of like, I don't know, like 50 or 60, it's going to be off quite a bit. If you have a CRI of like 95, 95 is considered pretty high. You get super quality. It's going to be a little bit higher quality light. CRI is not related to PAR or the actual output. It just refers to the color rendition itself, or how accurately that light will um, depict colors. So a lot of the times you may see, especially in some of the aquascapes, fancier ones, you'll see where they adjust the colors and adjust some of the LED channels to get more of a pink, purple hue almost, and that helps enhance like the reds and the pinks in the plants. For the Fluval 3.0s, so I'm not super in tune with the 3.0. I'll be honest. I would reference Bentley Pasco has a couple excellent videos that talk about the 3.0 itself. But I know you can ramp up um, like the blues, or the reds, and maybe I think you have like what is it, blues, reds, maybe, and then warm whites and cool whites. So you can adjust those a little bit to try to correct the color. So don't be afraid to get in their app there and adjust that. Like I said, on my 125, I have the Prisms by Nylock G, or Colin, and I have the basic model, so I just have two potentiometers, so I can adjust them a little bit, not a ton. That's kind of one of the benefits of spending a little bit extra money on a light, is you get more flexibility to ramp up. Maybe you want to ramp up the blues and bring the cyans down, ramp up the greens, or ramp up the reds to get the color that you like. So if you are having so if you do have, a little bit thicker glass, like on a bigger tank, or some low iron glass, and you want to try to compensate to correct that color, you could um, work with your light to adjust the actual aesthetic of the tank, and see if you can tweak it to something that you find a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. One of the benefits of having those options, other than try to portray an accurate color rendition in your tank, is that you can tweak your tank to the way you like it. Some people like their tank to look a little bit warmer, a little bit more yellow. Some people like their tank to look a little bit more cool white, or a bright white. So those are all options that you have. Realize that as you tweak those channels, and as you tweak each channel, you're increasing the output of various parts of the spectrum. You're not changing the spectrum itself. You're just changing the intensity in that spectrum. So if you turn your whites down and turn your blues way up, you can actually affect the growth of the plant. And Swampy may or may not be familiar with this too, if he's into growing kind of some of the terrestrial stuff a little bit. Um, but I'd have to reference the article. But more blue light, I believe, causes a plant to be a little bit shorter and bushier, whereas a little bit more red light, I believe, generally tends to induce a little bit taller growth. And I want to say, so don't take me hold me to it, but I believe that red is often used to try to induce a little bit more vegetative growth and some flowering. Somewhere out there, there is an actual God, somebody did a study on it, um, where they used red light on the same plant and blue light on the same plant, and it actually uh, showed like they measured the par, and the par was the same, but the actual shape and growth of the plant was pretty drastically different. So just keep that in mind. And like I said, some people will use that to adjust their growth, especially like if you're working in a grow house for reasons outside of the aquatic world. If you're looking for the yellows to pop, like I said, if you're working with a Fluval 3.0, I believe that has a warm white and maybe a red channel. So crank the warm white up, and like I said, that's generally a little bit lower on the color temperature scale. So the Kelvin scale, you'll probably be down like 3, 4, 5,000. That's going to give you a little bit more yellow appearance. So hopefully that helped answer your question a little bit. 1 inch thick glass is tough. I said the thicker it gets, a little bit more distortion that you see. And then, like I said, if it's a lower iron glass, that the lack of clarity and the augmented color due to the iron in that glass as it gets thicker um, increases in magnitude. So yeah, so no problem. Hopefully that answers your question. Like I said, with regards to lighting, so that link I posted, the 2 hour Aquarist on the color rendering index is pretty awesome to use. He also has another article that I really like when it comes to lighting. Let's see if I can find it for you guys real quick. Because a lot of people talk about like lighting spectrum and color temperature, and there is a lot to it, and it can get complicated, but it doesn't necessarily have to get complicated. A lot of people say, well, you need it was, and I think it's poor carryover from a long time ago when we used a lot of compact fluorescents or T5HOs, where the actual Kelvin temperature of a bulb was a little bit, we thought it was a little bit more important. So people used to think like 6700K was like everybody thought that was a sweet spot for growing plants, because the assumption was that that most accurately represents like a high noon daylight type of sunlight. But some various projects and studies have been done to suggest that you can actually grow plants just fine in a wide variety of color temperatures, because again, spectrum and color temperature don't necessarily go hand in hand. So that link I just posted is another article by Dennis Wong titled "Is 6500K Ideal for Planted Tanks?" And again, so 6500K, 10,000K, 3000K, that's the Kelvin temperature. So that's not the spectrum of a bulb or its ability to grow plants. That's the Kelvin temperature. It has no bearing on its actual power output or how bright it is, or the par that it puts out. I should say it's simply how warm or cool that light appears. So you can see if you look at that article while you listen, um, if you look at that article, you can see he shows a tank grown with 3600K lighting, where it's a little bit more orange, like I said, down real low on that Kelvin scale, and then he moves up to a tank all the way up to 12,000K, which is, a lot of reef keepers would used to use like a 12,000K middle halide bulb because it produces that cool blue. Um, like a bluish color, or like a bright white or a blue white, and you can see that he's got an excellent growth and wide variety of colors, but you can definitely see the aesthetic difference in them. So yeah, like I said, interesting article. And then Dennis has, if you want to get nerdy on light, Dennis actually breaks down lighting into some fairly simple ways to look at it as far as which lighting is maybe more desirable, and then how to read par charts, Kelvin temperatures, color rendering index. So a lot of those articles, it's all completely free. Dennis, he took the time to write these resources and share his knowledge and share these articles so that everybody could find them. Yeah, so I would, definitely take advantage of it if you know his articles are fairly short and straight to the point. He has a lot of pictures, so if you're a visual person, you can pick it up visually a little bit better. And I would highly encourage you, whether you're brand new to planted tanks or you're well experienced. His website has so much information from step one all the way to step 10 that everybody can gather from. And if you're really advanced, sometimes it's nice to just go through and read an article and be like, oh, well, there's a little refresher. I thought, uh, as we as we learn more things, we develop in the hobby, right? Think of your brain as an iceberg, okay? And the iceberg has only has so much space on it. So as we learn things, penguins start hopping on the iceberg. Uh, and the more penguins that hop on there, maybe they become unbalanced. Maybe they just run out of room. As you try to put more penguins on there and learn more stuff, it might wobble, or you may just run out of room, and a bunch of them start falling off the other side. So it's nice to go back and review that stuff that you once learned. And as you guys know, if you've watched the past couple videos, I'm leaning a lot towards setting up a saltwater tank again. And the last time I had saltwater was back in 2015, maybe 16. And while the concepts that apply are still the same, we do advance our knowledge and learn new things as we go. So I you know due to a career change, I got away from saltwater and focused a lot more on my career. So those saltwater penguins fell off the iceberg. So now I'm doing some reading, watching Bulk Reef Supply, 52 weeks of reefing, going through and digging into that to relearn some of this information. Some of it's new, some of it's changed a little bit, and some of it, like I said, it's just a good refresher. And you know, even though I've set up saltwater before, and I feel I wouldn't say well versed in it. I've have an introductory level education to saltwater. Um, it's nice to go back and learn that stuff before I, jump into another tank and try to help prepare myself and set myself up for success. I feel like if I get better lighting, I'm just gonna have worse algae. If it's got a better color spectrum, will that help or not if I remain a chronic overfeeder? So there's a lot of things that play into what do you define as better lighting? Is that higher intensity or par, or do you want a light that just has more bells and whistles to adjust to your liking? Um, a You can use something like a cheap floodlight that puts out a ton of power but has no adjustability, um, and you have one color. You have white, and that provides a wide, excuse me, a wide range of um, light. If we looked at a chart or a par chart or a graph, you see it provides some green light, some blue light, some yellow light, some red light. Because it's white, it's a mix of everything. It's any anything that's not a single color is, if it's white, it's full spectrum. Despite the nonsense marketing, uh, it's full spectrum. Um, but that may not be a better light than something that has more options, right? So a better light, in my opinion, is something that's going to have more options. That's going to have adjustability as far as output, right? Because if you're fairly new, or if maybe you just want to start with a low light tank, maybe you want to buy a higher end light that has the capability of being adjusted from lower light up to a higher light situation, because that allows you um, to advance in the hobby and change that tank a little bit as your skill set and as your knowledge increases, right? So if you're just getting into it, you're like, oh, I just want to first plane a tank ever. I'm just going to kind of jump into some easy low light plants, maybe some crypts, anubias, Java fern, maybe like Rotala rotundifolia if you're feeling frisky. So those don't require a lot of light. But in the future, uh, in order to not have to buy another light down the road, set yourself up for success and set yourself up in a position that you won't have to spend money on multiple lights and just get a nice light that has room for expansion. Right? You can adjustability is one of the huge benefits of LEDs. Right? So back in the day, we had compact fluorescents and T5s, and you had one bulb, two bulbs, or four bulbs, or if you got crazy, you had like eight bulbs. But that was your adjustability, was how many how many bulbs you had. That was it. Now we can use a single fixture that takes up the same amount of space and go from 0 par to 150 par with the flick of a switch. It's awesome to be able to have that adjustability. So as far as better lighting, and I see that you mean more expensive. Uh, Better lighting allows you more adjustability. So you have more than just on off, and you have an easier way to adjust it than how high you hang it off a tank, right? Because par decreases the further away from the light that you are. So if you have a light that's not adjustable, the only way that you can adjust the output is to put like a screen shade in front of it to cut that light back, or to hang the light up higher away from your tank. Well, if you have a nice LED fixture that has some adjustability, whether it's a simple potentiometer or whether it's an app, that gives you the option to put that light in one place, and then you can adjust your intensity based on that tank's needs or your skill set at the time. So will you get better lighting? Or if you get better lighting, will you have worse algae? I would say no, because like I said, better lighting, the more you pay, you're paying for quality and bells and whistles, because you can get a super cheap light that puts out a shitload of power. But the build quality is probably not that great. It's going to be cheaper LEDs that burn out faster. The pots are going to be lower quality. The whatever system it uses for a controller, the drivers will be lower quality, so they're going to burn up faster. Um, if you spend the money to get a better light, and by better I mean higher quality components, more adjustability, uh, that's where I would say is better. Obviously, power output eventually, but for most people, uh, a wide variety of the lights out there have more than sufficient power, and I mean power with regards to par output for most of what most people are trying to keep. So you can have an excellent planted tank with some good red coloration with, if you're getting 50 to 60 par at the substrate. You don't need, obviously there's guys out there running 100 par, 200 par, maybe more. You don't need that to get red color. Sure, it enhances it and it speeds up growth, but you can still get solid color just by having healthy plants, and driving those with CO2 and some nice lights. Don't trust reviews on Amazon, because, like I mentioned before, a lot of there are companies out there, that their lights or their products, whether it's a light or a filter or heater or whatever, look like they have 5-star reviews and rave reviews because people are getting those products for free in exchange for a review. So do your research more than just Amazon reviews. If you have any questions about lights or suggestions, feel free to message me or ask me about a specific light or ask me for a suggestion for a tank. And keep in mind, people ask for lighting suggestions all the time. The big things to consider when looking for a light, like don't just be like, what light should I put over my 20-gallon tank? Um, Tank size matters. Your goals matter. What you want to do. If you don't have any intentions of running CO2 and growing some really uh, crazy plants, then you don't need to go spend the money to be able to put 100 par on your substrate. Like 50 par on your substrate would be just fine. So your goals are a big factor, your tank size, and then your budget. Because the best light out there isn't necessarily the best light for you. The best light for you may be something that's in your budget range, because you just don't need to spend the money on something a little bit higher end. Sure, the everybody would enjoy an ADA, like an RGB solar. It's an awesome light. It looks cool. It's got excellent build quality, but not a lot of people have $800 to drop on a light like a RGB solar or the UNS Titan. They put out a ton of light and they look pretty, but that while it's an awesome light, that might not be the best light for you in your tank and your situation. They do look cool. It's definitely a different animal, that's for sure. Um, Also concerned about the life of the lights. Don't they go down over time, even with LED? I feel like I shouldn't invest too much until I know things, and I don't know enough things yet. Yeah. So fortunately, we've gotten away from bulbs, right? Because a long time ago we used to run like halide bulbs, like the metal halides I ran on that reef tank in the video that I was trying to show at the beginning. Those bulbs got changed out about every 6 to 9 months, because as those bulbs burn longer, the color shifts a little bit, so you're not getting the same color in your tank, and you're not getting the same power output. Same thing goes with like a T5 or even a T8. So the output decreases over time, and the spectrum shifts just a little bit. And now we have LEDs, and the burn time on LEDs is much longer. You need like 10,000 hours out of an LED. And again, that goes back to uh, the build quality. So if you spend the money on something like a nicer light, like a Chihiros or a UNS, or the 88, it's going to use a much higher quality LED and a better built heat sink with fans to keep those cool, and that extends their life. If you go with something cheap, they may not have any fans. It may just be a single aluminum strip that they're mounted to, and it's not a great heat sink, and so that can cause the additional heat, can cause them to shorten their life. Again, we're talking uh, lower quality LEDs like that, just the quality of the LED itself, the build quality. So obviously that can result in a shorter, longer lifespan. And then the drivers that are actually driving it. So you have a power supply for an LED, and then you'll have drivers that actually send the current through there. So a lot of the times these cheaper LEDs, they'll advertise, we have 5,000 LEDs on this 48-inch fixture. Yeah, but they're all like half-watt LEDs. So I'd rather have a few 3-watt LEDs than 100 half-watt LEDs. And they'll be better quality, last much longer. So sure, $50 light may put out the same par as a $400 light, but that $400 light is going to last much longer, have much more adjustability, and obviously it generally comes with better product support. So if you go with something cheap off Amazon that's foreign sourced and shipped across the ocean to get to your door, sure, it was cheap, sure, it may last for 3 months, but it may last for 3 months, it may last for 3 years, you don't know. And product support on stuff like that is usually garbage. Just the other day, somebody, and I think I talked about this on my other stream, maybe on Saturday. Somebody posted that they had a light go out, and they contacted the company that they bought it from. They bought it through Amazon, but they contacted the manufacturer. Manufacturer just didn't even answer them, so they ended up getting a refund on Amazon. So when you think about equipment, spend the money to get something that's not only a nice product, but it'll have nice product support. And with product support, like I said, comes options for repair, replacement a little bit easier, right? And then if it's got an app, they usually have like a forum or some tech support that you can reach out to get help with. So you're not always spending money just for the hardware. You're spending money on a little bit of the reputation and a little bit of the support that comes with it. What's up, IHP? Hope you're having a good night. Thanks for stopping by. Da, 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 da. Can't break the bulbs. Not on LEDs. Uh, so I've tried to move with a wide variety of light bulbs for various fish tank fixtures. Doesn't usually end well. So, and anymore these days, I love T5 high output lights. You have a lot of options as far as different bulbs that can assist you with different things. If you look up Marion Sterian on Facebook, you can see some of his stuff, and he still uses T5HOs. And he uses a combination of a variety of different bulbs to achieve his desired aesthetic and his desired growth. But it's extremely, or it's becoming extremely expensive to run T5s, simply just because it's getting harder and harder to find bulbs for them. So keep that in mind when you're looking for a light. Like, am I going to be able to potentially get parts for this? And I talked the other night about somebody was trying to get a power supply, and they were struggling to get a hold of Fluval for it. Um, which was just surprising because Fluval usually has different decent support. But that's something to think about. Like if this light breaks, will I be able to get parts for it? Like if you buy a T5HO fixture, you may get a good deal on it, and it's super cool. Um, but will you be able to get bulbs for it much longer? Nobody knows. I would say I wouldn't plan on it too much longer. Steph's trying to sleep. It feels like a tweaker night. That's not good. Sorry to hear that. Hopefully, listen to me drone on about nerdy aquarium equipment. Hopefully, you learn something. Might put you to sleep. If it does, I apologize. That's how things go sometimes. So I'm trying to find. All right, we'll do this. I'm going to. Um, StreamYard changed their interface a little bit here, so bear with me. So this is one of Marion Styrian's tanks. Again, he lives in Hungary, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously he's good at what he does. But I will show you his lighting setup momentarily once this computer decides to play nice. And because he uses T5HOs. Oh man, oh crap, sorry. We'll get there. In the meantime, creep on my Facebook. It's nothing exciting, I promise. Work. Romania. Sorry, not Hungary. Romania. So he's in Europe. See if I can get back into his pictures here. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm trying to. We're talking about different lighting stuff, so I figured he's a good example. Another person that uses a lot of T5s is Tom Barr. I'm sure everybody's familiar with him. I believe Greg Zierdek, who was just out at AGA in Chicago, also still uses a lot of T5s. Um, this it, something about them. The growth rate is just the growth that you get with them, and the color rendition is pretty awesome. So a lot of the old heads still like to lean that way. Let's see some LEDs that Greg is switching over to. Somewhere he's got a good picture of his lighting setup in here. All right, so we'll look right here. It's actually pretty good. Gives you an idea at least of. So here you can see he's got it's a 4 bulb fixture, and he's running 4 different bulbs to get the desired growth and color rendition in that tank. So while T5s give you a lot of options, you don't have the plug and play capability that you do with LEDs, where you can just push a button and change how things look. You have to buy different bulbs, and for that reason, and it getting really expensive to buy those bulbs, I don't necessarily recommend T5s for most people. So works great. Like I said, the LEDs have just come leaps and bounds anymore. One light the last 5 years, yeah, definitely. And that's with all your equipment in your tank, um, and just life in general. I, for the most part, recommend that you just spend the money and get a nicer light. And I know Zen, I've talked to you about lighting a little bit. Um, yeah, it sometimes it happens like that, and that's unfortunate. And hopefully, Finex was able to support you a little bit. I know there's a lot of budget lights on the market out there, and some of them are better than others. And I think for a lot of them, they're still fairly new to the market, so we haven't really determined their longevity, like the Hygers or the Aquanates. The Beamswork have been out for a little way, been out for a while, uh, and I'm not super convinced on their longevity. I hear of a lot of problems with them, so I don't recommend them. I know a lot of people do because of their budget and output. But my kind of motto that I live by is buy right or buy twice, or buy once, cry once. So spend the money up front to get a light that'll not only meet your goals, but it may exceed them down the road to give you some room for expansion. Well, Steph, we'll see what you can do. We can do to help you out. Appreciate you stopping by. Definitely. I know I used to stream a little bit more often. Always saw you in stream, and I saw you in a few streams throughout the weekend. And it was nice to see you again. Definitely a pleasure. Da, 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 20 gallon kit light that went out. Can't find a replacement. Yeah, so a lot of those the kits they come with like a hood that's specific to that tank, and it's very difficult to replace the light in it, unfortunately. And now one thing I didn't mention, and this goes not only for lighting itself, but for all your equipment. So generally speaking, aquarium equipment doesn't hold its value very well, right? So look at used tanks. You can get used tanks for a dime a dozen all day long on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or whatever. Um, but when you purchase a little bit higher end light, that light retains a better resale value. So if you spend $300 on a light, you may be able to still get 200 bucks for it. Like if it's a desirable light, hell, I think if you find a build my LED light fixture still, they probably sell for more now than they used to when they were new. But think about resale value. If you buy a nice light that's going to last and is fairly desirable, then if you decide to ever get rid of that light for whatever reason, whether you get out of tanks or have to move or decide to upgrade, that light will retain some of its resale value, so you can recuperate that money. If you go out and you get a cheaper $40 or $50 light on Amazon, regardless of the brand, when you go to try to uh, get rid of it and be like, yeah, it'll give you like 5, 10 bucks, if anything, and it's not going to have a lot of value. And you see that a lot. So when I go shopping for a used tank, I don't buy new tanks very often, just because you can get such good deals on used tanks and used equipment. If you look for a tank setup, a lot of the value isn't necessarily in the glass so much as it is the equipment. So if it's highly desirable equipment or quality equipment, even if it's a couple years old, it'll still hold a lot of value. Whereas even if you have a 75 gallon tank stand light and filter, if it's like a cheap Penplax hang on back filter and a cheap pick your favorite flavor or budget brand light, it's not going to have a whole lot of appeal or resale value, and somebody's basically going to pay you for the glass and the stands. To be honest, they're just going to take the equipment because it's cheap equipment. Whereas if you have a 75 gallon aquarium with a nice stand, maybe you have an FX4, an FX6, and then something like a Fluval 3.0, like, oh, all right, it's a lot more appealing to people that know what they're looking for, know what they want, and you'll see a little bit better resale value out of that. And you may even see better resale value yet if you sell that equipment individually as opposed to selling it as a set, right? Uh, yeah, Steph, I hear you. I would just if you're not growing plants with it, or if you're just growing easy plants, there's a lot of cheap, like really cheap LED strip type deals that you could retrofit in there, and you don't see that so often. So um, anymore. There used to be a lot of retrofit kits to convert hoods from like compact fluorescents over to LEDs and whatnot. But if you get crafty, you can take the guts of the old light out and then retrofit or DIY like a strip light in there pretty easy. So if you have any questions or want some ideas, we can definitely talk. Feel free to message me, and we'll talk about it and see what we can come up with. Maybe give you some ideas or also some suggestions. Gladly help you out on that one. 75s are if you have room for a 55 gallon tank, I loathe. I absolutely loathe 55 gallon tanks. They are a pain to work in. They're taller, so they're a little bit tougher to light. Like I said earlier, when you're lighting a tank, um, the farther it is from the light to whatever you're trying to get the light to, the more light you lose. So a 55 is a little bit taller than most tanks, coming in at what, like 21 inches versus 18 inches on like a 75. So it's gonna be a little bit taller. and then it's narrow front to back, right? You only have what, like 12 or 14 inches. It's not a lot of space. So for the almost the same footprint, you can go to a 75, which is the same length and only 6 inches more front to back, but you have a ton more options as far as scaping, and you get so much more depth to your scape and so much more room to work, that it really is like, if you can afford a 55, you can afford a 75, with regards to a budget and space, because you can light them and filter them for about the same money, and just a lot more effective tank. It's kind of uh, like a 40 breeder is super ideal, right? Well, a 75 is just a big 40 breeder. You just scale it up a little bit, and it's got a great shape, a large footprint. The footprint itself is like the actual space, like it's 18 inches by 4 feet. That gives not only swimming room left to right, but front to back, so that allows your fish to develop more territories. They're not just swimming in a straight line, one direction to the next. So I think you'll find that you're able to keep bigger fish if you're into bigger fish, and you'll definitely see more interesting behavior as they have a little bit more room to naturally move about. So, and for most fish, the height of a taller tank isn't really much of a benefit. Yeah, exactly, Matt. Right. A 29 uh, is to a 40 as to what a 55 is for a 75. I hate 29s. My first tank was a 29. It was a bear because it's tall and it's skinny. Um, there are definitely worse tanks out there. Like if you follow the link for my paludarium build, so I built a paludarium and I used the tank. I don't think they make them anymore because I've only seen a couple of them. It's called a 30 extra high. So it's 24 wide, 12 inches front to back, and 24 inches tall. So it's 2 by 1 by 2, and it's 30 gallons, and it is it's tough to reach the bottom. I mean, I'm not a very big dude. I have short arms, so it's tough for me to reach the bottom, let alone without getting everything wet. uh, and then front to back, it's just a headache. So if you were just breeding, like if you were trying to breed angelfish in there, maybe, but even then, you got to reach way down in the bottom to get down to your slate. So uh, not something I would recommend. George said he wants a low boy. 50 low boy is excellent for a lot of fish. Like if you have pistos, cories, shell dwellers, super cool because a lot of those don't take up a lot of vertical swimming room. And if you ask me, my personal opinion, I'd rather have lateral swimming room, both left to right, front to back, than vertical. Because most fish, let's be honest, in our aquarium, they're not going to necessarily utilize their vertical a ton. A lot of times, like you see, oh, I need a fish for the low level, mid level, and top level. So you basically just have like you're dividing the tank, which I don't know. It's all right. I personally like to see a little bit more mixture where the fish are actually utilizing all of the space that are offered. Yeah, I've never seen a 60 breeder in person either. And I've heard that they released them, and a bunch of people started snatching them up real fast. So they're actually, I think, hard to get a hold of and hard to find. Ba, ba, ba. Sell half my holdback and get several larger tanks and a pool or two. Oh my gosh, stop. Yeah. So, oh, local Petco has. Dude, I haven't stepped foot in a Petco or PetSmart in. I haven't been in Petco in at least 2 years, and PetSmart maybe once every 6 months if I need something weird for the dog. But that's about it. It's like even like local fish shops. I just don't go into a local fish shop. One, because we don't have any in where we live. Sioux Falls, about an hour and a half to the north, has a couple shops. Um, Matt at Sioux Falls Aquatics, super good dude. Mostly maintenance, not so much stuff selling out of the store, but he's largely salty. He's got a little bit of fresh water, but mostly saltwater just due to space constraints, and just his background is all saltwater. Then there's a couple others that um are okay. They're not great. Um, so I think, does Doug runs Growfin? Is that right? I think his name's Doug. Doug or James. Can't remember. I actually sold him a bunch of my spare tanks so that he could take those down to the shop. So I haven't been over there yet. I talk to him every now and then. I saw them going to swap meets before they actually started opening up a shop. So I know they're over in South Sioux. I need to get over to his place one of these days. And then down in Ottawa, is it JC or JZ has a little shop that I haven't been to. I sold them some tanks too. Pet supplies plus. We don't have pet supplies plus here. What's up, Kenny? How you doing, man? If you guys wants to come up and chat, I believe I pinned the link in the chat, so it should be at the top, and you're more than welcome to. So far, we mostly the past hour, we mostly talked about lights. A lot of stuff about light. I am here to see the light. uh, no, 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 not at all, Kenny. Don't worry about it. Hey, you do your thing, man. So due to my work schedule, is kind of all over the place, and just family. I got my son's 8 now, and so he's involved, and he's got piano lessons in school, obviously, and it's still soccer season. Then he just started hockey tonight. Tonight was his first practice for the season. He's played the past couple years. My wife's coached him, but I literally just I usually look for an open spot and just go, like, hey, nobody's streaming right now, or nobody's planned to stream the next 15, 20 minutes, so I'll jump on for a little while. And then just see how it goes. Usually, if it's during the day or early evening, I only stream for about an hour or so into the late night. The other night, I was talking with Anthony and Priscilla. I haven't streamed with them in forever, but we got started talking on salty stuff, and it was 3.5 hours later. I was like, all right, we got to call it quits. So no problem. I said I saw you were streaming after I had kind of started. So again, like I wasn't trying to walk on your stream or anything. I get it. Um, there's a lot of people in the community, and some people are attracted to maybe one personality over the other. Some people are, psychopaths and listen to multiple streams at one time. I don't know how they do it, but they do. So you're welcome. And speak of
What's
the devil.
up?
What's up, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good, great. Other than being stuck in Oklahoma for work, I'm doing okay.
Well,
Not too
stuck in
bad.
Oklahoma.
Yeah, I'm down here for a little bit of training for work. So 2 more weeks, and then it's back home, and get a
Gotcha.
chance to work on the fish tanks a little bit. While I've
Now,
been gone, I'm bugging the wife.
where are you from?
Uh, so I live in Sioux City, Iowa.
Okay.
So I've lived in Iowa for a couple years now. Before that, I did about 6 months in Oklahoma, 6 months in Arizona, about a year and a half in Texas, and then about 5 years in South Dakota. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I used to live out in Rapid
Nice,
City near Mount Rushmore. If you've been out by the Black Hills, so
nice.
uh, it
All that
it
traveling,
definitely.
I'd be doing a lot of collecting of native fish.
Oh, I know. I mean, so when I was down in Texas, I lived near Lake Amistad, so we'd go out to the San Felipe Creek, and I had a 75 set up on the back patio, and it was all like little sheep's head minnows, and they had
Yeah,
all sorts of mosquito fish, so a couple different species of gambusia, and it was super awesome. Unfortunately, I didn't distribute them before I moved, so I didn't
yeah,
get to keep them. Like I said, it's super super cool to keep, and super awesome. Unfortunately, due to moving around all the time for work, it kind of makes this hobby a little more difficult because it's tough to settle in and keep things going for a while. So
yeah.
I've been
I
in
could imagine.
I've been in Sioux City for about almost 3 years now. So kind of getting a fish room put together, and odds are I'll make some more progress on it and then pick up and move somewhere else. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it
Yeah.
goes. So I was listening to a podcast the other day. I think it was an old aquarium guys podcast, and they were talking darters. And the person that was on the stream was from Iowa, and they were collecting darters in Iowa. So that got
Oh,
me
nice.
thinking and looking around. And apparently there's some really cool stuff that I didn't even know existed in my backyard.
Are you familiar with fishmap.org?
I am. Yep. So
Yeah,
it's a
so that's
super useful.
it's a great source from NANFA for finding out like what native fish you can catch in your area or pretty much any area. If you're traveling, you can look up different watersheds with just by putting in your zip code or the zip code to where you're going, and it'll bring up nearby watersheds and what you can catch and where people have caught them in the past and stuff, and it's awesome. It's one of
Yeah,
my go-to sources.
yeah, it's super cool. So my kid, I've got we've got a couple kayaks. My kid's 8. He likes to go out, and when he was younger, he'd sit in my lap in the kayak, and we'd go find a little stream and just sit in the kayak and net fish out of the stream. And we'd,
Nice.
paddle up or down the stream and jump out and wade around, and
Yeah.
super cool. Fish Map is, like I said, excellent resource if you're into natives. Even if you're not into like keeping
Yeah.
natives, it's cool to just go out and you don't even have to collect them. Just be like, catch them, put them in a specimen container, just check them out and see what's in your backyard.
Yeah, I just about two months ago or so, I think it was, I just submitted some data to Fish Map because I collected some rainbow darters in my area, which is about 300 miles east of their native range. So
Really? Wow.
yeah, so I had submitted all the data that I had collected and stuff from collecting them and stuff. So hopefully to expand their native range and stuff.
That's awesome. And
Yeah,
especially with funding being so limited for like some of the uh biologists and stuff, it's we can play a pretty big role in helping track that data and submit that. And who
yeah,
knows, like you may find a species that was previously not known to be in that area, and you may spark a whole new study, and there may be a big push to examine your area. And that's how we can find species that maybe we once thought were extinct, or a variation of a species that we thought was a fairly
yeah. Or like
endangered. So,
species that may have been extirpated from one area, but they're not even known to be existing in this other area. Where like people like me are just going out and sampling all the creeks that I drive past and shit. Like literally,
right.
anytime I'm driving, like if I'm driving to work or driving to a job site or something, if I pass a stream or a creek or something that I haven't fished yet, I'll like
Yeah.
I'll drop a pin on my GPS, so I'm like, oh yeah, future collecting spot.
Right. There's a ditch with water in it. I'm gonna go check it out.
Yeah,
So
literally, that's me.
yeah.
Like
So
I drive around with 2 fishing poles and 3 nets and a minnow trap in my car at all
yeah.
times. you know.
uh, so if you're big into collecting, do you use like a Jonah's dip net, or do you have a preference, or do you just use a
No,
cheap one?
I have one of the perfect dip nets from
Okay.
Jonah's. Because it's literally the perfect dip net, and I have one of the largest size like aquarium nets you can get, like the cheap blue metal ones with the
Yep.
blue netting. I have like the largest size of that you can get for like some of the smaller fry that you might see swimming around in the stream and stuff, so I can collect those guys too.
That's awesome.
And then I've got a 10-foot bamboo pole that doesn't have a reel on it, it's just a fixed line,
Okay.
but it breaks into two sections, so it's like two 5-foot sections. And then I've got a collapsible rod that basically fits in my backpack, and that's pretty much always in my car.
Super cool. Now, do you get into I didn't know this was a thing until I started, going out and collecting a little bit when I was down in Texas, like micro fishing.
Yeah, yeah. So that's my 10-foot pole, the bamboo rod. I typically, for the most part, I only use the end of it that the fishing line's actually attached to. So I use it as like a 5-foot rod, but I do have like number 30 hooks on it
Okay.
and stuff. So like if people that aren't familiar, number 30 is like, it's like smaller than my pinky nail hooks that you pretty much either have to snell onto the line or like sometimes I'll super glue them on the line.
Right.
And
Uh,
like,
Gluing them on there. I wouldn't even think about that. Like
yeah,
I
and
looked into it and
I use like a 1 pound mono test line.
mhm.
But
No,
yeah,
I got
microfishing is
into
something I want to get into more.
fly fishing a couple years ago, and a lot of a lot of people that fly fish, tie their own flies. So I got into flying
Yeah.
ties. I got a vise and started tying 'em, and I got into some Facebook groups, and holy smokes, some of these people tie like literally you have to have a magnifying glass to tie this stuff because it's so
Oh yeah.
freaking tiny.
Yeah, they're using like 24s or 26 number 24 or 26 hooks and stuff like that that are so small. Like most of the time when I'm micro fishing or even just kind of like not using really real micro hooks but using small hooks.
Okay.
The only bait that I use a lot of the times is a little piece of red yarn that I tie onto the hook
Okay.
and use the red yarn as bait.
Okay. Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, it's like I never got into microfishing. Like I started, like I said, I ordered some hooks and stuff, and then just never. I was got busy. The kid didn't really have the patience for it. He's like, "Dad, can we just use the net?" I was like, "Well, so we can." It's like we can. As I bought all this stuff
Yeah.
though.
Look at all
Uh,
the stuff I have though.
right. Let me see if I can blow this up.
Yeah, that's a Tanaga hook or something probably, right?
Yeah. So that is, I mean, literally the entire hook is maybe I don't know an eighth of an
The
inch
size
or
of
so. I mean,
yeah,
it's on a dime.
it's like the
It's like
size of his nose there.
yeah. So it's crazy. I mean, so you're literally people are using this equipment and actually catching a fish with a hook and line, and we're talking like minnows, and it's just wild. So the fact that it's even
Yeah,
possible
and
if you're
that
doing it.
looks like a damselfly larva tie, or maybe even a scud.
Yeah, yeah. So it looks like it's on a scud hook,
Yeah,
kind of like almost like a midge type pattern. But
yeah,
yeah, so it's super cool stuff, and it's just getting out and collecting. And like I said, even if you're not keeping things for your tank, it's just cool to go see that stuff and see what's in your backyard, and maybe if you know that that's there, that'll kind of inspire you to want to keep a native tank. I know I've been watching. Used to be Maple Street, now it's Coldwater. But he's got
yeah.
all
Brandon
his.
in there.
He's got him and Vanessa have all their native type stuff, and it's super cool to watch and see that stuff, um, and especially you get into some of the sunfish. Sunfish are like the North American discus. Some of the
Yeah,
colors that they get will easily rival a lot of discus. They're just absolutely beautiful.
yeah. It's like the tank behind me. I've got pumpkin seeds and bluegills in there, and there's a northern sunfish, a rock bass, and a bowfin.
Okay,
In this 180 gallon behind me.
that's awesome. What kind of bowfin is it?
It's a Mia calva. So bowfin was only one species, but it was recently separated into two different species. But it's probably about 14 inches, little male bowfin that was
Awesome.
dip netted out of the Missouri River or Mississippi River.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
That's super cool. I know there's an acquaintance from an Arizona club when I lived down in Tucson. They posted the other day they had some shiners. I think they were rainbow shiners, but they actually had them spawn in their tanks. They were all fired up, and um,
yeah, yeah. I
so
so I breed rainbow shiners too.
that's awesome. Super
It's like
cool.
I've got so I keep exclusively North American natives,
Okay.
and I've got a couple different species of fish that I'm breeding, and a couple that I'm working on breeding now. But my rainbow shiners, I've had they've bred I think spawned four times for me. so
Awesome.
far, just this past year. So I had like altogether, I had over 400 fry, and I think I'm down to like 150 right now.
Okay.
But so I've got them. I've got Piedmont shiners that I'm working on spawning. I've got saffron shiners that I'm working on spawning.
Awesome.
Mountain red bellied dace that I'm trying to spawn as well. And then I've also got rainbow darters that did spawn for me inadvertently in my one of my stream tanks, like my
Oh, really?
73 gallon stream tank. Um, it used to be the only tank that was upstairs because it was in my sunroom, and I had it running off of just natural sunlight coming in from the sunroom and stuff.
Super
And
cool.
everything else is down in the basement in my fish room, and so it was neglected for a couple months and was getting filled up with algae and stuff. And then like I went to clean it one day and found like 30 rainbow darter babies in the bottom flow chamber of the tank and stuff. I'm
Okay.
like, no shit, because it was pretty exciting because uh, through all the research of like trying to figure out how to breed rainbow darters in captivity, I'm fairly certain that nobody has actually bred them in captivity yet.
Really?
And like I did it by accident,
Well,
so
props,
it
man.
was pretty,
That's
yeah, it
awesome.
was pretty exciting.
So, I mean, a lot of people, um, like obviously, like you use outdoor tubs a lot,
Yeah,
and like people like I just throw the fish in there and they spawn. I mean, a lot of that is due to the algae building up in there, just because it generates so much like micro critters. So you get
yeah,
all that algae and some little critters running around, and then you get your live food from your bugs that are actually deposited in eggs, and you get all your nymphs and stuff. Um,
yep,
so people freak out when they see like bugs or little pods running around their tank. Like, that's free food, man. That's good stuff.
yeah, yeah.
You don't want to get
That's
rid
the
of that.
sign. That's a sign of a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now
But
you said you had a like a stream tank set up. So do you
yep,
have some sort of like a lot of flow coming from one side to the other to simulate that kind of environment, or
yeah. So I don't know if um it's currently broken down right now because I moved it from my sunroom down here into the basement, and I haven't worked on setting it back up yet because I procrastinate on everything. But
join the club?
but but yeah, so it's a 73 gallon tank that I custom built myself, and it's 60 inches long, uh, 24 inches front to back, and then 14 inches tall.
Okay.
So it's a long, wide, shallow tank. But then it's got 2 inches from the bottom. It's got a false bottom that runs 4 inches from one end to 4 inches from the other end. So there's a 4 inch gap on either end.
Mhm.
And I have a linear cross flow pump in the bottom on one side, forcing water underneath the false bottom and back up the other side. So it creates like a continuous linear flow, um, simulating a stream or creek or
Yeah,
something like
that's an
that.
awesome setup.
Yeah.
So
So
that'd be that's super cool.
yeah, I had that set up. It was set up and running for almost 2 years,
Okay.
and just like probably probably 4 months or so, I had gone without cleaning the filter, doing like water changes. I was just doing top offs and wasn't like cleaning it a lot and stuff. So naturally it developed a lot of like blue green algae and a lot of hair algae and
Mhm.
stuff all over the rocks and everything. And like with the algae, like you said, with algae comes all sorts of microfauna and stuff. And a lot of the times, like the increase in like infusoria or other different microfauna species and stuff, uh, lets the fish know that there's an available food source if they were to have fry, you
Yeah,
know,
and
so that could it actually encourage spawning.
definitely. And I talked
And
about
yeah,
one of my streams. we kind of talked about breeding cories a little bit, and that's a technique that's often used to induce spawning in cories. Is you'll almost withhold food from them for a while. So you'll withhold foods. You won't feed much. You'll let the water level drop. You warm it up, kill the flow, and then you'll hit it with a big, cool water change. Fill it all the way up. Maybe increase the flow a little bit, and then just start smashing them with food and all that. That food source lets them know, like, hey, it's safe to spawn. There's food enough to not only supply ourselves adequate nutrition, but to supply potential offspring. So that
Yeah.
that explosion in a food source will often trigger them. So
Yeah, and I kind of went through the same process with my stream tank when it was upstairs. Is like, it probably went a month or so without a top off. So I had like 5 inches of evaporation out of the tank and stuff. So it was running real. It was running pretty low
yeah,
and everything. But that kind of in the wild fish experience that anyway through dry seasons or midsummer. You're a lot of the creeks dry up to almost nothing and
right,
everything. So that like reintroducing that new fresh cold water and the abundance of food source and stuff is like, okay, here comes fall and there's a shit ton of rain coming now, and here comes all the food source that comes, that's coming from upstream and stuff now that was trapped in
right.
these little pockets maybe somewhere. And now is a good time to spawn because our offspring's going to have plenty of food.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I think a lot of the times, as fish keepers in this hobby, like we maybe overstress like the importance of like one temperature all the time. And I think it is important biologically just to trigger different cycles in the fish to allow your tanks in the summer to heat up more, or in the winter
Yeah,
allow them to cool down more. Whether that means actually adjusting if you heat a fish room all at once, or individual heaters and tanks. It's a, I, there are gains to be had by adjusting the temperature and letting it fluctuate a little bit, and often even like on a daily basis. The fish that we keep, a lot of them are found in fairly small bodies of water, and just that body of water itself may fluctuate several degrees throughout the day. Let alone you have these fish that may move deeper into a body of water, down in some cooler temperatures, and then in the morning, as they become active, they come up into the shallows to feed. Even
yeah,
like when you get in, you walk in like into a lake, or you jump in a lake, like that top 6 inches, the temperature is not bad, but you get below 6 inches in like a decent sized lake, it's gonna cool off pretty quick. And fish
yeah,
transit these temperature regions, multiple times throughout the day, and people are like, oh, my water change water was 2 degrees warmer or 2 degrees cooler than the tank. Well, that's fine. Like you did, most fish, like they travel through these a lot. And I mean, I like to fish a little bit, so a lot of the times when you're fishing, you're looking for like the thermocline, like fishing lake trout. You're looking for that
yeah,
spot in the water column where the temperature changes drastically, and a lot of the time the like lake trout will like to sit right there. So I've actually learned a lot about, um, the habit patterns of fish through fishing, whether it's uh, like spawning processes that they go through, where they maybe move and they'll go hold out on points, and then they move up into the shallows. Like if it's a largemouth, they'll in the winter they go out deep, and then they move up and onto the points, and then they move further into the small canals up into the shallows to spawn and bed and whatnot. Um, so like I said, uh, a lot of people think that their tank needs to be 76 degrees year round, and that I mean, I just don't
yeah.
think that that's the case. And I think a lot of people actually keep their tanks too warm, but that's opinion. So
Yeah, and like me being exclusively a North American native enthusiast, I mean I don't heat any of my tanks, and my fish room, the tanks down here, like this tank behind me, this past winter, the coldest I think I measured it was like 46 degrees Fahrenheit,
oh, really?
and the warmest it's been throughout the summer was probably 72 degrees. So that's
Really?
that's quite a difference in temperature swing.
Mhm.
But you're talking from winter to summertime, so it's not a problem. And a lot of fish, a lot of native species rely on those temperature shifts from winter time temperatures to early spring, mid spring temperatures to trigger spawning. Like with my rainbow shiners, for instance, um, they rely on that the rise in temperature in the spring from the mid 50s up into the mid 60s and holding at the mid 60s for like a week or 2 weeks or so, and that's what actually triggers them to spawn.
Okay, it's awesome. It's super cool
So
to. I think a lot of spawning fish for me, and why I enjoy breeding fish is just kind of learning about the processes that they go through, and some of the
yeah,
behaviors. It's super neat just to see that, because there's so many different spawning strategies out there, and it's crazy. Um, sometimes I think I got into this a discussion about this or something similar the other day, but you'll see a lot of people that their tanks are in, pretty rough shape. And it's very apparent, and they're having some problems. So I'm like, well, my fish are spawning, so it must be good. I'm like, you do understand that a lot of fish spawn as a survival strategy, right? It's not because they're doing well. It's like a last ditch efforts to save the species and produce offspring.
yeah,
And I think killifish are an excellent example. It's like,
yep,
what was it, National Geographic, that what was the title of the, it's like a video or a series, like living in an elephant's footprint or something. It's like killifish literally live in mud puddles that dry up, and the water conditions are absolute dog shit when they spawn.
yeah,
And they plan, and they've developed a spawning strategy that they're going to spawn, they're going to die, and then hopefully it rains and those eggs hatch eventually. So
and that's why a lot of a few different, well, most species of killifish, their eggs require that incubation period where they're dried out in like peat moss and stuff, and then you rehydrate them, and that's when they hatch. Just because of that strategy in the wild, where like these fish are living in rain puddles that are gonna dry up, and they need to spawn, and their eggs need to survive that drought period so they can reproduce and continue their line and stuff.
I was reading an article. This was probably 6 months ago, but there's a species of killifish that the basically like the diapause period, or the dormant period, the longest like successful known period from like an egg from the time it was laid to the time it hatched out was like years, like literally years, and it
Yeah,
still was viable. I was like, that's just mind-boggling, that something like that can happen.
yeah. It's evolution and survival of the fittest, to the T.
So it's just, like I said, it's super interesting to get into some of the breeding strategies, whether it's uh like the, God, what's the one of the species of like the cynodontis cats, that actually it spawns and whichever cichlid it spawns with, like one of the main lake, the Rift Lake Africans, it spawns, so that the cichlid actually carries the eggs in its mouth with its own batch, or with its own
Yeah,
spawn, and then eventually they hatch out. So they just pawn it off on somebody else. Just like really cool breeding strategies like that. I just think are super interesting from a
yeah,
biological point of view. So, and I'm
yeah.
not
That's
sure.
like there's some fish species that can actually like hold on to sperm from males for months and months until the conditions are suitable for the females to spawn. And they've already got fertilized eggs that they're just holding on to, and don't release them to actually spawn until until they're in the right conditions and stuff. So that's
Right.
another like adaptation too.
Yeah, that's super cool. Now, so like you've got a 180 behind you. I know you said you kept like some bluegill and stuff. Do you ever see any like spawning behaviors in those guys?
Oh yeah, so my so the two so the biggest Lepomis in my tank behind me is a pumpkin seed, And I don't know if you can see this depression right here is
Okay.
his nest that he created when I added some females to the tank,
Oh, really?
and that he decided he was going to make a nest there, and turned my aquarium into chocolate milk for about 2 weeks. And so, but yeah, he ended up spawning with one of the other female pumpkin seeds. But I think the presence of the other sunfish in the tank and stuff kind of stressed him out a little too much, and he ended up eating all the eggs.
Okay.
So I wasn't able. I should have pulled him out. Hindsight's 2020, but I should have pulled him out and raised him in my fry system and hatched him, but I didn't get to it in time, and like it was like the next day, almost all of the eggs were gone, and then later that day when I came home from work, everything was gone.
Oh,
You know.
really? So now you mentioned your fry system. What exactly? Can you just do like a rough overview of kind of what you have set up for that?
So, are you familiar with like Dan's fish or not Dan's fish?
Yep.
Dean's fish room,
Where
like
he's
his
got
his
the little
system for
trays that he
raising
sets in each
fry.
one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I pretty much mimicked that.
Okay.
Just like tweaked a little bit for my needs,
Yeah.
and but that's pretty much to a T. Like what I do, I have a 20 long with these kitchen organizer trays in it, and the so my so for instance, my rainbow shiners are nest associate spawners, so they spawn over top of Necromus species, like creek chub species nests, and
Okay.
creek chubs build rock mounds
Yep.
for their
That's
nest.
if you've never watched videos of that happen, that's
Yeah,
super cool too.
it's pretty cool watching like a creek chub with a rock in its mouth and like building this mound of stones. But so rainbow shiners, for instance, are nest associate breeders. So they breed over top of creek chub mounds. So what I do is I take the trays um, that you would hatch out the eggs in, and I put a piece of egg crate in it, just like kind of stuffed down about an inch or inch and a half down into it. And then I pile some river stones over top of the egg crate. And when I notice that the shiners are ready to start spawning because they're all fired up and stuff,
Mhm.
that's when I'll put the container into the aquarium with the shiners, and then they spawn over top of the stones, and the eggs all fall down into the bottom of the container. And
Okay.
when I've seen that they've done that, I'll swap the container out for a new one, and start my drip line into the container. Have that constant flow of fresh water into the eggs and stuff. And within 5 days, the eggs have hatched, and within 8 days, they're like little free swimming fry, and that's when you start feeding them.
Awesome. That's super cool. Yeah, I just I posted up the link. You did a live stream a while back with the rainbow shiner spawn, and so that's cool to see that little setup.
Yes,
Um,
that's like a 3 hour live stream, but
yeah.
like
It
so that's when I had first pulled, because they were in my stream tank originally, and I noticed them getting all like fired up and active and stuff. And I noticed a little bit of spawning behavior in the stream tank, but I was also watching my rainbow darters just eat the eggs as they laid them.
okay.
So I'm like, all right, so it's time to pull these guys out. So I pulled them out, put them in a 20-gallon long, and then I set up an old cell phone and started live streaming so I could drive to the fish store to get some stuff for brine shrimp and like shit that I needed. And
Okay.
like, but I could also watch what was going on at the same time. So that's why I'd set up that live stream, was just basically for me to watch it
So
while I
you
was
could
going
watch
to
your
the
own
fish
fish.
store. that
Hey,
was like
man.
my surveillance camera while I was
Yeah.
running to the fish store to get everything
Whatever
that
it
I needed to
takes.
prepare.
So there's actually speaking of setting up cameras like that, there's a guppy breeder that breeds a lot of IFGA type competition guppies, and he had to travel away for it was like 10 days for work, And his friend was supposedly coming over to check on the tanks and stuff, and inevitably something went wrong while he was gone, and his friend wasn't coming over as often as he thought he was.
Oh
So I
yeah,
mean, as creepy as it may be, you can get like a cheap little camera to set up in your fish room to set up. Not necessarily just so you can see the fish, but it's like at any time you're like, all right, check. Did I turn the lights on? Did I turn the lights off? Whatever. Is there a bunch of water on the floor? Did the even if you just have an overview of a wall of tanks, you can kind of get a general idea of, okay, well, that one's bright green, or a bunch of them are green, or a bunch of them are cloudy. Like, obviously, the lights have been left on for a while, or nobody's been
yeah,
here to take care of this. And because I was like, hey,
and
I just called him yesterday, and he said everything was good. I'm like, I looked at it, and I'm like, it's definitely not, definitely not.
and
So,
that's partly why everything in my fish room is run off of Wi-Fi power strips. So I can like
and I,
literally anywhere in the world I can go on my phone and turn on and off lights, on and off pumps, whatever,
and then
all from my phone.
I finally got with the time and ordered some Wi-Fi outlets instead of the old analog timers that I was running all my lights on. So
Yeah,
welcome to 2022. I've been running 20, 30 tanks off analog timers, and sometimes I'll be down in the fish room after the lights go out. And I'll turn it on and apparently forget to shut it off. And I'll come down 3 days later and
well,
the tanks are all bright green. I'm like, whoops.
yeah. So this is what I use here.
Okay, yeah.
So it's just a Wi-Fi power strip. It's got
Yep.
4 USB ports and then 4 regular plugs. And there's a Smart Life app on my phone that
Mhm.
you know connects to them all through Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and stuff, and I can just control all the outlets individually and set up timers and everything for everything all through the app, and it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, so I've actually seen people, now we have people with running a bunch of tanks or with LEDs, it's not such a big deal. But I've seen people offset their tanks. So they're all on different schedules. They're not pulling as much power at one time to try to help out with the electric bill. Um, so it's kind
That's
of
pretty
neat
smart.
the actual power pull all at once, since it's a little bit lower. They're claiming they see lower prices on their electric stuff. I've also seen saltwater people. They'll run like a refugium in the sump below, and they'll have them on opposite light schedules, and it helps uh, even out swings and in various
Yeah,
parameters.
so that helps with pH swings because pH will drop at nighttime when the lights are off because the algae and stuff are not creating oxygen or creating CO2 and whatever. So that at typically at night when your lights go off, your pH can drop. So running a refugium light opposite your tank's light schedule will does that. It helps with the pH swings and stuff.
Yeah, and we're another talking about reef stuff and kind of refugium related things and using algaes. So we don't necessarily do it in planted tanks, but in saltwater tanks we use macro algaes to for nutrient export and protein skimmers for
Yeah,
nutrient export.
like
So you'll
Califa and
yeah, so you'll grow an algae intentionally in a enclosed area, and after it grows a bunch, you'll pull it out and remove all the nutrients out of the water. So there's some pretty cool, basically algae reactors now.
yeah.
With a,
So I ran a so I've got altogether I've got probably 23, 24 years in the hobby, but
okay,
I've got probably 12 years in saltwater exclusively.
awesome.
It's like I had at one time I had my own business selling saltwater fish and corals and setting up and
Okay,
maintaining aquariums for people and uh I had an import license and a tax ID number and all that stuff, and I would actually I've I've imported corals from Indonesia and Taiwan and the Caribbean and stuff. But
super
yeah,
cool.
like I had I had I had a 265-gallon mixed reef display tank,
Oh,
and then
awesome.
I had probably close to 2,000 gallons worth of like frag tanks and holding tanks for
Okay,
fish and corals and stuff.
Cool.
But on my 265, I had a turf scrubber, so it's
Okay. Yeah.
an algae scrubber
Yep.
on there, and and that worked wonders for nutrient export and stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, I was looking around and they have like basically acrylic cylinders, and you can as cheap as wrapping a bunch of lights around them, and then you'll take your it could be like a lot of people just use like Catamorpha, and they'll
Yeah,
grow it in there, and then just boom, pop it out. So that was pretty cool to see. And that's something that we don't necessarily think of in freshwater tanks is when you grow a bunch of plants, the plants are consuming the nutrients, and then when you trim the plants, it's actually you're exporting. That's like you're getting rid of those nutrients out of the tank.
yeah.
Um, so something kind of neat and different. And now, the last time I kept salt water was like 2014, 2015, and Maya's technology changed quite quite a bit since then. And I'm
Yeah.
looking at setting my BioCube back up as salt now that I'm kind of settled in one spot for a while. And I'm looking at like, holy crap, things are a little bit different than they used to be. I mean, all the concepts apply, but there's so many more options out there, and uh,
Oh yeah.
so it's super cool.
Like
Uh,
I think it was about five. Yeah, it was about 5 years ago when I got out of the hobby altogether for a little while, and that's when I was at like my peak with my saltwater
okay.
stuff, and like just like the peak of my business and everything. But like I had some sudden changes in like living situations and relationship stuff, and uh, just the whole idea of trying to move, a couple thousand gallons worth of saltwater tanks and corals and everything, like an hour north of where I was living to where I was moving,
Right.
and it was just not gonna happen. So I sold pretty much all my tanks. I sold all the corals, all the fish that I had, and I mean I lost so much money just dumping everything. Like my 265, I probably had conservatively I had probably 60 grand invested into that tank
Mhm.
between livestock and setup and everything.
Yeah.
And I sold the entire setup. I sold the livestock for 1,500, and then I sold the tank and equipment for 1,500. It's
Wow.
like, that
Wow.
was the biggest hit that I probably took, and it just completely pushed me out of the hobby for a couple years.
Oh, easy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean when you have like a $60,000+ investment and you sell it for 3 grand, you're
Right.
kind of hesitant to get back into it.
Oh, definitely. Now, just real quick, Ed asked. So he says he's got Wi-Fi plugs. He's told he wouldn't do any good because he can't get Wi-Fi through the fish tanks. If I use a hard line, could I put a modem in my fish room? You can definitely you could run a hard line from wherever
Well,
your modem's at down to the
yeah,
fish room and set up a like a hotspot or a Wi-Fi access point down there, and that would allow you to have should give you plenty of signal strength, I would imagine.
and let me ask you this, Ed. When you're in your fish room, do you have Wi-Fi on your cell phone? Because if you're down in your fish room and your cell phone is picking up your Wi-Fi signal from your house, then your Wi-Fi power strip is going to pick up the signal too.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean that doesn't. I kind of get the concept of what somebody had told you,
Okay.
but
Yeah, he said he doesn't get Wi-Fi downstairs in his fish room. Apparently, he said no.
he doesn't know. So I
Um,
mean, you can run an Ethernet cable from your modem to another modem,
mhm. So
or another hotspot down in your fish room, to alleviate that.
right, and they've got a lot of different systems out now. Like, so I've got the Netgear Orbi, which is basically it's called a mesh system where it ties a few different access points together to try to ensure coverage
Yeah,
throughout your house. It works well. I have Wi-Fi throughout the house. It sometimes it'll bounce you back and forth between 2.4 and 5G, so your speeds will drop off. Um, oh, if you got a 100-foot Ethernet cable, yeah, throw that bad boy downstairs and just set up
Oh hell
a
yeah.
wireless router down there, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, run that 100-foot Ethernet and set up a new Wi-Fi router
Said.
downstairs.
So I actually I had so I only had one CO2 setup for a while, and my 125 was on one side of the room, and my BioCube was on the other side of the room, about 20 feet away. But there was no way to get an airline from my CO2 setup under the 125 over to the BioCube without it literally just being out in the open across the floor. So I ran it a temporary fix. I ran it down in a cold air return into the basement across the floor joist in the basement, and then back up a cold air return on the other side over by the BioCube. So I had probably 80 feet of airline to run CO2 over to the BioCube off the 10-pound setup. So it was a little bit ghetto, but nobody could see it, and it worked just fine.
Hey, it works, right?
So yeah, sometimes you have to get a little creative, Ed. I think you're on the right track though, and you
Yeah.
should be all set. Oh, if you got drop tile ceiling, easy money, man. Yeah,
Oh yeah, run the cable right above the drop tiles. You'll be fine.
yeah. So hire some help. Have some young punk do that. Give him $20 to run a cable through your house for you and send him on his way. Be like,
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, I was in high school. This was like 15, 16. And there was a very small gal that ran a local shop outside of town, and she didn't really need a ton of help with the shop. She's like, I got some yard projects if you want to make a couple bucks, or if you want to get store credit for helping out with the yard, like mowing and stuff. I'm like, sure. I'd drive my happy ass out to this local fish stop kind of on the edge of town there, and I'd either clean fish tanks for her, or I'd go out back and mow the lawn. I didn't care. I was getting money. So
Yeah.
uh, so good stuff. No, back on the topic of reef things. We were talking about pH a little bit, where you run your refugium lights a little bit offset of your main tank lights and stuff. I haven't dug into it too much, but the science concept behind it kind of makes sense. Where people run their protein skimmer airline to an outside source as opposed to pulling air out of the room because of the carbon dioxide content, I guess. Are you familiar with that at all, or?
Um. Yeah. So one of my earlier saltwater tanks, I had 180 gallon boat front that I had set up as a mixed reef, and I ran the uh, the airline tubing that I ran for the protein skimmer. I actually had outside um, during the winter time because it pulled cold air in and helped cool down my aquarium.
Oh,
It helped
awesome.
cool off the aquarium a bit.
That
Because
makes
at
sense.
that point I was running like this massive T5 and metal halide combination light. It was like one of the I forget what's the brand now. Uh, I forget the name of the brand, but it was like one of the big Oceanic like T5 metal halide combo
Okay. It
lights. But
was it one of the they kind of had it was they didn't use the single screw in bulbs. They had the contacts at each end, and then they had
yeah, the
T5s.
double ended.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
yep. But so I ran that, but I would run the inlet for the air tubing for the protein skimmer from outside in the winter because it would help. Like I said, it would help cool off my aquarium by like 2-3 degrees, which doesn't seem like much, but for a reef tank, that's a
That's
lot.
yeah.
You know.
So you weren't here quite yet. I think you were running your own stream, but we started off. I was trying to play it. I had a video of my old. I started with a 72 bow front the first time I tried salt, and ended up with a pair of Ocularis clowns in there. Yeah, so I had a video of
Yeah.
them spawning in a little PVC end cap. So we were talking about lights on it, and I ran two 250-watt metal halides over it, and we got into talking about the amount of heat that those damn things put off.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's kind of how this stream started. As we were talking about some of the changes that we've seen in equipment from metal halides into LEDs, and um, we didn't really we got on lights, and then we got into how like marine lights may or may not compare to planet tank lights and stuff. So we didn't really get into a ton of the other saltwater equipment. um, I know we've got a lot of freshwater people in here, so when we reference a protein skimmer, a lot of people may or may not be familiar, but basically a protein skimmer. Usually there's hang-on back versions, but usually you put it in your sump, and it's a lot of the times it's a power head, so a pretty good sized power head with a needle wheel impeller, and then you run an airline for a venturi. And what happens is that the power head itself pulls in water from the sump, and then it uses the venturi to pull in atmospheric air to make a bunch of tiny bubbles in that pinwheel impeller instead of a standard impeller with, like the little flaps on it or whatever. It just has a bunch of
What
little
things?
needle
Yeah.
wheels, and what that does is, as it spins, it not only moves water, but it chops up that air that it's sucking in through the venturi into a bunch of tiny little bubbles. And then there's a collector. A lot of the times it'll be a conical shape, and as those bubbles rise, the surface area on it basically collects the proteins out of the water column. So if you don't have much surface agitation on a freshwater tank, a lot of the times you'll notice you get a kind of a protein film or a weird film. So what's happening is
Like
that's that
that
protein.
oil slick, if you will.
Yep. So the oil slick, that's a great way to put it. It collects on the surface. So those little tiny little bubbles start picking up all those little protein molecules, and the container, the collector, if you will, funnels that up and creates a foam. So instead of protein skimmer, you call it protein foam fractionator or whatever if you'd like. And that
Yeah.
foam
That's it.
ultimately
They
based.
used to be called foam fractionators before they were called referred to as protein skimmers.
Yeah. So as that foam kind of builds up within the collector there, it'll eventually overflow into a cup, and that's your export. So your nutrient export. You take all that protein, and then you dump the cup. And if you want to smell something absolutely disgusting from a fish tank,
Yeah.
smell a skimmer cup, because that
Don't
stuff
don't ever
is,
spill that stuff on your floor.
oh god. So that's kind of what we were talking about. Kenny was referring to the airline that he was using to bring in cold air. So that's where that comes into play. So he was using the airline for the outside air, bringing in cold air and introducing that into the water column to help cool your temps down. So, and then we talked about temps a little bit, as far as we don't think about it in freshwater so much because we usually don't have as many pieces of equipment, but just the heat given off not only by like the old metal halide lights or your lights, just due to this reef tanks, but due to the pumps and having multiple pumps, whether they're power heads inside the tank or your protein skimmer pump, they generate a lot of heat as well. So that's something that in a reef tank you kind of
Yeah.
have to pay attention to, is how much heat those pumps are putting out. So you'll see one of the draws of something like a Vortec MP series power head, where it actually has so if you're not familiar, it's basically a magnetic drive, but the motor sits on the outside of the tank, and then the actual uh, propeller side of it, I guess it's on the inside of the tank. And they basically suction together through the glass through a magnet. It's a magnetic drive. So the pump's on the outside. So
Yeah.
any heat that it generates stays outside the tank. It doesn't transfer into your water columns. You get a little more stable temperatures, and you don't have to worry about running, a hella expensive chiller all the time and saving on your costs. And again, just adding to the stability.
Yeah. Yeah, and the
So
way so another thing to add is like the way protein skimmers work is with with the forming of the micro bubbles is the micro bubbles actually have a positive charge to them, whereas the protein molecules have a negative charge. So that's why the protein molecules are attaching to the air bubbles, and then it raises them up through the cone and into the collection cup and stuff.
yeah, that's awesome. I honestly, like, way more about salt than I do. I didn't know about the actual charge difference, and exactly how that worked and what caused that to happen.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
super interesting to know. So Yeah, that's crazy. So yeah, if you're ever around somebody with a reef, and I mean, try it at least once. Just open up their skimmer cup, just one time. That is god
Take a
awful.
sip, you know. Go for it.
Uh, so I think I know I've shared it on my channel before. It's been a long time ago, but Bill Wan's build. I don't know if it's
Oh
running
yeah.
anymore or not.
Yeah. I don't
Uh,
know if I haven't heard anything from him in a while, but I forget the name of his company, but I was like friends with him on Facebook and stuff, and I'm very familiar with like his builds.
yeah, but so he had, if for those of you that aren't familiar, his name was Bill Wan, I believe, and he was in, was it Wisconsin, I
Hmm.
think, or Minnesota? Wisconsin, I think.
Yeah,
Uh,
either I think either Wisconsin or Minnesota. It's one of those two.
but he had the largest private reef tank in a house. It was like a world record type deal, 20,000 plus gallons. And he
Yeah.
basically engineered all his own equipment from his protein skimmers. Um, and for like a normal size tank, most of your protein skimmers run, I don't know, 18, 24 inches tall. His skimmers are like 6 feet. They're
Yeah,
they're the
6 to
size of a
10 foot
human being.
tall.
So and it's absolutely insane. And I posted a link to a video of his setup, and just mind-boggling
Well,
and pretty
last
crazy.
I think last I heard from him, he was building an addition onto his house to accommodate a 100,000 gallon reef tank. I think he was in the process of building.
Wow.
It was like quadruple the size of the one he had.
Yeah, no shit. That's insane.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know what he did for a company, but it's something with engineering, I'd imagine, because he's a pretty smart dude as far as and the video, and there's a couple articles out there that talk about everything that he's done, and the dude's a genius. He's just
yeah.
super good at what he
He was
does.
like a mechanical engineer or something, and then he eventually started his own business making industrial saltwater equipment for large aquarium. Excuse me, for like large public aquariums and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. So I think you're over near New York, right? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm in upstate New York.
Okay. So I'm guessing you've been to the Long Island Aquarium then.
The one in Riverhead.
The one that Joe runs,
Yeah,
Joe Yaulo,
yeah,
whatever his last name is.
yeah. Joe Ayul. Yeah, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I actually did. I had a private tour of the 20,000 gallon reef tank there and stuff.
Really
Because
awesome.
I was friends with Joe for a while, and I did a couple like saltwater convention shows. I was vending there a few times
Okay,
and stuff
awesome.
when they had them there. But yeah,
Yeah, that's super cool. Joe's a
I've been
nice
there.
guy. He's he came out to a convention that I kind of helped organize here in the Midwest, and he gave a talk. I think the title of it was "Lazy Ass Reefer Syndrome."
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. That was he came
Yeah.
out, and Laura Birnbaum came out and gave a talk about cuttlefish. So I think cuttlefish would be super cool to keep, and I mean, other than them being kind of hard to find, it doesn't sound like they're super cosmic and difficult. What's up, Stephanie? But yeah, so that was when they were still together. Um, they've
Yeah.
since parted ways, but that was super cool. I've had Scott Fellman. I've gone to a couple of his talks after he split off from Unique and started tanning. But I still pick his brain a little bit about some saltwater stuff, even though he's
You
moved on.
you know who like it was just today I was thinking about. It was like actually it was earlier, a little not too long ago. I was just thinking about him and like I haven't seen or heard from him in a couple years. Was um Mark Callahan, Mr. Saltwater Tank.
Yeah, I see him post
Like
stuff for work on Facebook. pretty regularly.
Yeah, he does Facebook still, but he like his YouTube channel. He hasn't posted anything in like 2 3 years now.
Really?
And I met him a few times at Riverhead Aquarium in Long
Okay.
Island and stuff, and that was pretty cool. It was like meeting somebody that I had learned like most of the stuff I knew about saltwater from my early years, like
Yeah.
meeting him in person and stuff. You know, it was pretty cool. But
Yeah.
he that was who like I learned so much from his like early episodes of like Friday morning quick tips and stuff,
Hmm.
and just like from my early years of saltwater fish keeping and stuff, so it was a great resource too. That and Bulk Reef Supply, like their YouTube channel,
Yeah.
was
So
a great resource.
as I'm getting ready to get back into saltwater a little bit, I just started watching 52 Weeks of Reefing the other day,
Oh yeah, the
and
BRS
it's just
TV.
yeah. That's I mean I think it's just a super awesome series to follow, and it literally just
Yeah,
goes step by step. Now, obviously, what they set up isn't necessarily what most of us can probably afford. But it's still,
yeah,
you can apply all the concepts the same, and the information behind it still applies to smaller setups. Not very many of us are going to be buying $1,500 sumps and $4,000 display tanks, but there's
yeah,
a time and a place for it. It's still pretty cool.
yeah. My 265 I bought from a buddy of mine. Like he bought it brand new, and then it sat in his living room empty for 2 years, and he never set it up. And then I bought
Really?
it from him. Yeah, it was brand new. I bought it from him. It was a tank and stand. It was an oceanic tank with a stand. I paid $200 for
Get
the 265. That
get
was
out.
brand new, but it was 2 years old, but it was brand new because it had never been filled with water,
Yeah.
nothing. And
I,
then I built my own sump for it, and I had a Diablo XS 350 skimmer,
mhm.
which like if you're familiar with that, it's like a protein skimmer that's the size of a 5 gallon bucket with like it had three of the Seche 1100 pumps
Mhm.
on it, so it was like three 1100 gallon an hour pumps with the needle wheels and stuff. So it was a hefty skimmer that was, I think it was rated for like upwards of 600 gallon tanks
Right.
that was, running on a 265 gallon.
Yeah.
But
That's
I had I was running that, uh an 80-watt UV filter, and I had a carbon and GFO reactor, and that was all I ran for a while, and then I added on a turf scrubber at one point,
okay. Now,
and
I
that was
remember
my
when I was getting
filtration.
into this, when I was getting into salt before, I saw a few people run like the algae turf scrubbers. It doesn't seem like I saw a lot of them. Was that a concept that never really caught on, or was it just not something that many people bought into? Or
I think because of the design of the whole thing, it wasn't very attractive. So I don't think it caught on very well. And then people started making the algae reactors, which is basically it's pretty much an acrylic cylinder with either uh, a 360 LED light that's inside of it and just growing algae within it, or wrapping LED lights around the outside of it and growing algae in there, and you're basically running water through it like you would any kind of media reactor. And I
hmm.
think that caught on more because of the similarity with the other media reactors like the GFO and carbon reactors and stuff.
Okay.
It looked more appropriate for the setup. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As
It
opposed
definitely.
to this like big hefty box with a piece of PVC pipe in the top with holes drilled in it and some plastic canvas mesh with lights on either side of it. You know what I mean?
Right. So for those of you that have no idea what we're talking about. I'll see if I can share one real quick. So an algae turf scrubber, again, we're going back to nutrient export where we're intentionally growing algae in a controlled area so that we can remove that. So generally speaking, with an algae turf scrubber, you'll basically have the equivalent of a drip wall, where you'll move
Yeah,
water from the sump and you'll drip it down a piece of basically like craft plastic mesh, and then you'll sandwich that with a light on either side and blast it with light. And the goal is to get algae to attach to that plastic mesh and grow so that that algae consumes nutrients, and then you just rip the algae out and dispose of it. So, like we said, that was kind of a concept that never really caught on based on
yeah.
it.
And
Really,
I think it was more just because of the design and like the overall like bulkiness of these turf scrubbers and stuff.
yeah, so it took up a lot of space. So what people ended up going to, and this is what seems to be far more common. I think it looks a little bit cleaner, and obviously some of these are a little more DIY oriented, but
Yeah,
more of an algae reactor where you have a cylinder with either a light on the inside of it or lights wrapped around the outside. And again, you're intentionally growing that algae. That's not the picture I wanted. Damn it. Intentionally growing
yeah,
that algae inside, and then you'll open up the reactor periodically and remove some of it. So, like you said, it's a sleeker design. I think it does take up less space, and it just kind of it's probably easier to plumb in with everything else.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so yeah, so that's kind of cool. That's a piece of equipment that I think maybe not necessarily an algae reactor like that, but something like a turf scrubber could easily be utilized on the freshwater side of things. That I've never seen anybody run one, but it's an option for nutrient control and export. So the salty guys
yeah.
do a lot of things a lot different from us, but I think a lot of the concepts can apply. We're finally starting to see, thankfully, in my opinion, a lot more sumps on the freshwater side of things, which the benefits of a sump far outweigh any pain in the ass canister filter you'll ever see in your life. They're just so
Yeah.
much easier to work on. They add, and I
So
obviously
much more room for activities.
exactly. Uh, so they increase your water volume. It sits under the tank. I know some people don't necessarily have the stand that would allow for a sump or the space, or maybe the know-how to drill a tank or buy a tank. Um, but a sump basically is just it's a large tank that sits underneath your display tank, and it has contains your filter media, and it gives you space to not only increase your overall total water volume to increase stability a little bit, but it allows you to hide your equipment down there and add more equipment without it being unsightly hanging all over the tank. And they're just so much more. They offer so much more flexibility, and you can put extra equipment in there. And I don't know. I'm glad we're starting to see them more often. Um,
Yeah,
I wish people would be more open to them, and it's nice to see more people on the freshwater side, branching out and going into some of these things that the saltwater guys have used and talked about for years. I think largely, so on the saltwater side, water flow is extremely important, and I think in the freshwater side, it's generally neglected a little bit. Obviously, a lot of your if it's not a stream, you don't usually have a high amount of water flow, but there's water flow to an extent. And particularly in a planted tank, we use that water flow to distribute nutrients and distribute CO2 fairly
yep,
equally to all the plants and increased water flow throughout the tank. It doesn't have to be high water flow, but you don't really want any dead spots in the tank usually. Um, and the saltwater people do some pretty cool stuff. So saltwater guys, I know, focus a lot on randomized flows, whether you use one of the swiveling powerhead type deals. I've seen as much as there was a guy that set up a surge type system where he used I don't know if I think it was a 55-gallon drum, and he basically plumbed a pump from his
yeah.
sump up to the drum above the tank, and then had a big valve.
Until it
And when
reached, like yeah, once it reached the overflow, it dumped into the tank and stuff, right?
yeah, So it's a super awesome setup. What basically what that does, it simulates waves, and you're randomizing the flow so that your corals don't grow funky one direction, or and you're not getting those dead spots, and you're getting nutrient delivery equally throughout the tank. And there was a few people that I've talked to. It's not super common, um, but they'd actually kind of almost so in nature we get storms, right? Whether that's like a tropical storm or something that hits a reef, and just scatters everything about and stirs stuff up. So in a tank, to like move your power heads around every now and then, or take your power head and just blow all that crap out of there and let it flow around. It's kind of cool to just like simulate the idea of a storm, so that if you have anything, obviously in reef tanks there's a lot of rocks. If you blow that stuff around, it's not sitting there decaying in one spot, and building up building up
Yeah.
problems. So I think flow is definitely something that is it going to cause major problems? Is it going to cause major problems in a freshwater tank? Probably not, but I think it's a good thing to at least think about. And a lot of fish, like getting into creek fish, it's extremely important, and it helps with oxygen levels a lot. And
Yeah.
a lot of the times we worry about the temperature in our tank getting hot, and if a heater fails, usually tends to fail in the on position, which is one of the reasons that I always recommend, if you're going to buy a heater, spend the money and get something nice, and then always run it with a dedicated separate controller. Just it's a cheap backup, so you get a 40. You want to save some money, so instead of a $40 heater, maybe you get a $25 heater, and then an ink
And
bird
buy
on top of it's
$20
like
ink.
$25. And like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't want to spend that extra money. I was like, would you rather? I was like, to me, if you ask me, a heater is the one piece of equipment that can kill your tank the fastest. I was like, in a I'll say poorly set up tank. If a heater fails, and people tend to oversize their heaters, I think if a heater fails, it's going to cook your fish, and it can happen in a matter
Yeah.
of hours. And it's largely not so much due to the heat itself, but the depletion of the dissolved oxygen in the water column. So I always recommend.
Or you can be super cool and just keep native cold water fish and not have to
There,
worry about
there you go.
heaters.
Don't have to worry about it. That's the way to go, man. Uh, so I see people that skimp out on heaters, or they don't want to run a dedicated controller like a cheap little $20 Inkbird. I'm like, that's
Yeah.
$20 of insurance. Would you rather spend the extra $20 and have the peace of mind, or would you rather lose $500 in fish because you were too cheap to spend the $20 to avoid it? So that's my take on that. But one thing that I think we can do to help avoid the problem as well is increase your flow and surface agitation, largely because that not only encourages gas exchange to help keep those dissolved oxygen levels up in the case of rising
Yeah.
temperatures, because as the temperature rises, the water itself tends to hold a little less oxygen, which is why in the summer, you'll see a lot of fish in lakes. They'll move out to deeper water for a variety of reasons. One of them's the better oxygen levels down in that cooler water. Um, so the extra surface agitation helps with the gas exchange, promoting more oxygen in the water, but also helps with evaporative cooling. So if you happen to have a heater stick on for whatever reason, you kind of have a little bit going to help you out there, to avoid additional problems, hopefully
Yeah.
before you catch it. So things to think about. Uh, Ed says he's going to kill everything when he gets to salt water.
I've been there, man. I can't like it's part of the learning curve. You can't. I feel like you can't be good at something unless you fail at it and learn from your mistakes. You know what I mean? Like I've failed so many times in saltwater, and it's just all about learning from your mistakes previously and fixing and making everything better. But like first couple years in saltwater, I wasted so much money on corals that I shouldn't have been keeping and stuff, and not doing a lot of research and fluctuating parameters that are just killing like expensive corals and stuff until eventually I figured out what I was doing, and then it starts to pay off, and that's when it was probably five years or so into me keeping saltwater tanks that when my hobby started to turn into a little bit of a side business and then into an actual business because these corals that you're buying they multiply and then you start fragging them and you can sell them and make a little money to fuel your hobby, and that's what I started doing. And then once I got good at it is when I started buying like the $300 polyps of fucking zoanthids and stuff that I started growing out, and then I turn around and I'm selling these little single polyp zoanthids that are the size of a pencil eraser for $300 plus and stuff, and like
Right.
it became a business for me, as
And
well as a hobby, but
and it's
also a very good source of income for a while.
It's awesome if you have clients' tanks that you set up and maintain because they're
Yeah,
paying for the equipment, they're paying for the livestock. Eventually, it's going to outgrow the tank, and then you just frag it, and then you just use that money to supply either other customers' tanks, and you can charge them for the livestock itself, or you can just sell that outright to somebody else on the side, and
yeah,
a little extra money for your work.
yeah. It was nice. It was nice for a while. I
It's
had I made quite a bit of money at some of the frag swaps and stuff that I've been to in the past.
uh,
What do I need to spend $20 on?
all the good stuff. And that's the thing, like, so we were talking a little bit at the beginning of the stream, like, aquarium equipment generally doesn't hold its value really well. So you can buy really nice equipment that somebody, like you said, if you wait and if you just keep your eyes open and look around, somebody that has a $10,000 into a reef setup is going to be moving, and just like, it may be their misfortune, but it's your lucky day because you might get a $10,000 reef setup for $1,000, and next thing you know, if you want to part it out yourself, you can part it out and make money. Whether that's splitting the corals, because a lot of people, so it's difficult to move mature reef tanks, right? You have very large pieces of coral, so a lot of the times if you move it, you're just going to frag it out and sell a bunch of frags and basically start over anyway. But
Yeah, I tell you, the guy that bought my setup definitely got a hell of a deal out of that. Out of that.
and when I was into to salt a little bit more before, back in like 2015 or so, it'd be crazy. You'd go on like Reef to Reef or Reef Central, and at the time I was brand new to the hobby, and like see people selling setups, like full setups for like 15 and $20,000. But the more I got into them, like, well, just that the one return pump alone is 500. He's got two of them. Each of the lights is $600. He's got three of those. I said,
Yeah,
before you know it, you're at 5 grand and you haven't even put anything in the tank. Like just the tank could be $3,000, $4,000.
yeah,
Oh, Ed was asking what he can spend $20 on to help things, and it sounds like he was talking about we mentioned
yeah.
an
An
Inkbird.
Inkbird controller.
Yep.
So an
So
Inkbird is it's just a thermometer basically with an on-off switch that controls a power source. So you put it in your tank, put this the temperature um, controller part of it in your tank, and plug your heater into it. And the Inkbird is a lot more reliable than any of the internal thermometers on any heaters, and it will control your heater for you. So it'll turn it on and off when it needs to. And I'm pretty sure if your heater fails in the on position, the Inkbird's going to turn it off
mhm.
and not allow it to stay on. So it's
so
like, it's a fail safe.
it's similar to like your uh so like the heater itself basically just has a thermostat in it, so whenever it hits the set
Yeah.
temperature, what it does is it closes a relay, and then that energizes the coil to provide heat. So more or less, the Inkbird does the same thing. It's got a temperature probe that reads the temperature, and then you have the controller itself, which is just a little digital board that you set to. You can set it for some of the mid-range models. You can run like a heater or a chiller on to set a dedicated range. You could have it turn a
Some of
fan
them
on
you can run both.
if your tank's getting warm, so it'll turn a fan on if it gets like to 78 degrees, and it'll turn the heater on if it gets down to 76. And it just provides an extra layer of control and redundancy, whereas you're not relying on just the heater itself, the thermostat in there, which is generally a 10 to 15 cheap ass piece of equipment. But the controller as a backup, just like I said, it's an extra layer of security, and for 20 bucks, it could save your ass pretty quick. So
Yeah.
you mentioned looking for one at Aquashella. I don't know if you'll see one at Aquashella. Um, I don't know if a lot of aquarium like companies
You can
sell
get
them.
them off of Amazon, Ed.
Yeah. So you
Look
can get
on
them
Amazon. Inkbird controllers.
Amazon. And
They're
here's
cheap,
a
like 25 dollars.
Yep. So if you follow Tom from TM Aquatics, he's in Minnesota. He runs Inkbirds. He did a video, kind of a review and setup on them. Super simple to set up. And I think a lot of them now have Wi-Fi. If you spend a couple extra bucks, you can have Wi-Fi, so you can connect to it on your phone and see the
Yeah.
temperature of your tanks, and probably get alerts from it. So reef guys generally use controllers, like the Neptune, was it the Apex?
Yeah, I had the full Apex on my 265.
Okay.
Like,
So Apex, like anymore, so you run a controller, and that'll be your heater controller, and then it can run all your pumps, your skimmer, your lights, everything. And they're cool nowadays because now they'll send text messages and stuff to your
yeah,
phone and be like, "Hey, this is what's going on,"
yeah,
and they monitor like all the parameters. Like you don't test the parameters; it has all probes and it monitors a bunch of different parameters, whether
yeah.
that's your ORP, salinity, and you can literally just pull that up on your phone wherever you're at and check on the
Yeah,
status of your tank.
I had salinity probes, the dissolved oxygen probe, um, temperature probe, and then I had like water on the floor sensors and all like I mean I had everything that you can I think possibly get for the Apex at the time.
Hmm.
And
That's super cool.
it's awesome because if your temperature fluctuates a degree and a half outside of what you have it set to, you get a text message and an email alert, and you can literally log on to your Apex system through your phone through Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and turn on and off heater pumps and turn on pumps, turn off pumps, and all that stuff all through your phone.
So super cool piece of equipment. It's going to be expensive,
Yeah,
um, but it's as I said, if you're running, they said if you have $65,000 tied up into a setup, I was like, that is peace of mind all day long. It was like
yeah,
500 bucks on a $10,000 investment. It was like that's easy money. I mean,
yeah,
it makes sense. So another thing that it'll control, and we were looking at this the other day. We were talking the other night, um, and so a few people that was talking to, they weren't aware that you actually a lot of people use CO2 in a reef tank, and um, so the equivalent, so in a planted tank, we inject CO2 into the water column to provide basically CO2 and carbon to our plants, so that they can grow like plants are 45% or better carbon, and then they use the CO2 for photosynthesis and everything. So it helps our plants grow healthier and faster. In a reef tank, we use CO2 in a similar fashion, but a little bit different method. We use CO2 with a calcium reactor. So what you do is you use the CO2, you'll inject CO2 into the water, and it'll dissolve into the water column and form carbonic acid, and then you'll have basically pieces of calcium, little chips or different size pieces, whatever calcium media you use, and that
yeah.
carbonic
Typically
acid.
in the form of like live rock rubble, basically.
Okay. Um, so the carbonic acid will dissolve the calcium into the water column, and then your corals will actually uptake that calcium, and it'll enhance their growth the same way that just injecting CO2 in a freshwater tank does.
Yeah,
I know I was talking to Stephen P. happened to be in the stream. He's like, "Holy crap, I didn't know that." So yeah, it's just a lot of people on the planet side, if they're looking for a cheaper CO2 setup, like, hey, have you looked at any reef forums lately? Because a lot of reef people sell CO2 setups fairly cheap when they upgrade or move on
Yeah.
to something different. So pretty cool to see how there's a lot of equipment out there, both on the freshwater and saltwater side, that a lot of people aren't super aware of. I mean, like Ed, I'm not saying anything bad about it or anything, but we're just talking to him. He runs a bunch of tanks. He's well experienced, and we're talking to him about inkbirds. So hopefully, if nobody learned anything else out of this stream at all, at least Ed is now aware of inkbirds, and hopefully he doesn't have to rely on that, but he can utilize that in his fish room to save himself some change down the road and hopefully avoid catastrophe.
Yeah. Well,
Fantastic freaks. What's up, Austin?
I don't mean to cut you short or anything, but it is 2:30 in the morning here, and I've got to get up in 4 hours.
All
So
right. Thanks, Kenny. It's
I'm
been a
gonna
pleasure, man.
I'm gonna head out. Yeah, it has been a pleasure. I think this is the first time I've been up on like your stream or anything, so
Yeah,
that's
it's been
awesome.
fun.
But
So I just because of work lately, I haven't been able to
yeah,
stream much. But I'm getting into saltwater a little bit more right now, so I'm gonna have to pick your brain. I didn't know. I knew you were into the North American native stuff. I didn't know you were so big into salt, so I'm gonna have to bug you.
yeah, man. I mean, like I said, I have like 12 years plus in the saltwater hobby, and I had my own business at one time and importing corals from all over the world and selling them wholesale and stuff and all that. So I've got quite the extensive knowledge and when it comes to saltwater. So but yeah, I'd love to be up on stream with you again sometime and talk salt or freshwater or whatever.
Yeah, sure. And likewise, Kenny. So I appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by. Hopefully, everybody enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully, we taught them a thing or two. I know I
Yeah,
learned, several things just talking to you about the short hour and a half or so that we did talk. So I appreciate it very
yeah,
much, and hope you have a great night.
no problem. See you guys
Yep.
all later. Bye, everybody in the chats.
See you, Kenny. Awesome. Well, now you guys are stuck with just me. I saw Austin stop in. What's up, man? I was actually talking about you earlier, Austin, because we were talking about the Henry Dorley down in Omaha, and I had mentioned the aquarium there and the big event tank that you guys got married in front of. So super cool stuff. Austin probably thinks he's a creep. I've actually met Austin once at one of the Nebraska Aquarium Society swap meets last spring. So uh, if you don't follow Austin, I'm sure you guys do, but go check him out. He produces a lot of content. He does travel. So we don't have a ton of events in our local area near Omaha and within about an hour's drive, but Austin does make the trip and he does attend several of them. And he produces a bunch of content where you can kind of see what our local scene looks like a little bit. So he is fairly local to Matt, Liquid Zoo, and myself. Unfortunately, we just one of these days we'll have to meet up and maybe stream together or something when I'm in town. Drive down to Omaha, or maybe we can do uh, an LFS crawl or something and hang out and produce some content together and kind of show people uh, that the Midwest isn't all just gentle rolling hills and tumbleweeds. Oh, so what do you guys have? I know so Kenny and I were talking a lot. I didn't pay a ton of attention to the chat. I know you guys were chatting. I saw some stuff amongst yourselves. I saw a couple comments about what we were talking about. Do you guys have any questions about what we touched on, or do you guys have any questions about like equipment stuff in general that you're wondering about, or is there anything that I mentioned that you maybe want clarification on, uh, or do you just want to complain about my mustache? We can talk. Davenport has some swaps. So I've got a buddy in Ames that goes to the Quad City swaps, and so Tom from TM Aquatics said that they estimated over 1,200 people at the Quad City swap last Sunday. I haven't been able to make it out there, but that sounds like an awesome swap meet. And in Quad Cities, it's a little bit of a drive, but not terrible. So yeah, I'd love to meet up, carpool. I know you said you're going to Aquashella, so I'm going to live vicariously through you to see Aquashella, and hopefully next year we can maybe both roll together. My wife is into fish, but not to the extent that I am, so she'd probably be happy if I went to an event and didn't force her to come along with me. So I'd love to make that happen, Austin, and hopefully we can see what we can come up with. I believe it used to be GERS, the Greater Iowa Reef Society. I think there's a might be a Cedar Rapids or Des Moines swap coming up. I'm not sure. Like I said, unfortunately, I won't be at the next one. I haven't been to an Iowa swap in a little while, actually. I've talked to a lot of my Iowa friends, and I've met up with them at the Omaha swaps. So if you're in or near the Omaha area, the Nebraska Aquarium Society. It used to be the Nebraska Reef Society. I think it's now the Nebraska Aquarium Society. They hold usually a swap meet in the spring, a swap meet in the fall. Um, I'd say it's largely freshwater stuff, but you can find some super cool stuff. They put on a good little show. It's not a show per se. They're not going to have speakers, but it's a great opportunity to buy from local breeders and stuff. Good night, Kenny. We'll see you. Thanks again. It was a pleasure. That's the first time I really got to have a conversation with Kenny, and it was definitely a breath of fresh air to talk to somebody that's heavily involved in the native side and then has a little salty side to him. So you guys know I focus largely on plants and breeding freshwater stuff, um, but it is definitely cool to talk to somebody new. I said I haven't talked with Kenny much. I see him in a stream here and there, and I see him pop up on some stuff. So it's super cool to have him be interested to come into our stream here. And Steph said, I'm glad you thought it was a good stream. Some reminders we may not be thinking about. Um, and I may not. The goal is to try to be informative and teach somebody a thing or two. But even if I'm not teaching you something new, I try to bring up points that maybe you knew, but you don't necessarily think about all the time. So now, like I said, going into uh, the winter season, obviously, Florida had unfortunately Ian, knocked half of Fort Myers off the map. So that's not something that you can super prepare for very well. One thing you can prepare for is power outages. So we're getting into the winter season where if you're in the Northeast or the Upper Midwest, where it's going to be snowy before we know it, and we're going to have power outages due to ice or whatever. And it's going to get cold. So go ahead and along the lines of equipment, which is where the stream started, have the equipment ready to go and think about that stuff now because you're not going to be able to buy a generator when the power's planned to get knocked out in the middle of January, right? So a generator, you know, you can go to Sam's Club, get a generator for 300 or 400 bucks. It's going to be noisy, but it could either save your life or your fish room. And if you have a fish room, you've got thousands and thousands of dollars tied up into some often really super hard to find fish. So somebody like, we'll say Stephanie, she's got some awesome hip and sister species. She's got the RB236 uh, breeders there. It would be super unfortunate if she lost all that stuff, um, all her like 236s because the power went out and she didn't have a backup plan in place to take care of that. So have a plan. Like I said, generators 300 400 bucks. Um, but 300 400 bucks if you use it one time to save, $5,000 worth of fish, I'd say you got your money's worth out of it. So, and then if you already have some of that equipment, whether it's a battery backup um, or some battery powered air pumps, a generator, make sure that's now's the time to start thinking about okay, tuning it up. If it's a gas generator, you're probably gonna need to you may need to clean the carb, put fresh fuel in it, make sure it's getting ready to go. 600 watts. That's a big guy. Two times. So it's like you said, like I'm saying, uh, spend the money and put those protective measures into place. The redundancy. She's got a 600-watt lithium battery bank, and she's used it twice. That thing's probably already paid for itself. If you use it once and it saves your fish, then it pays for itself. If you look at some of these species, uh, if you get into some of the expensive plecos, you're talking 100, 200, $250 a fish. If you have 10 fish in a tank, you're talking 2,500 bucks, right? In a potentially a 20 long or a 40 breeder. Um, so it if you spend 300 bucks on a cheap generator and it saves one tank, then it paid for itself. And Kenny just made a great point: a power inverter that you can plug into your car. So that's definitely something that you can utilize as well, especially if you only have a couple tanks running. I've done this myself personally. So we lost the power during a snowstorm, and I had a power inverter for my vehicle, and I ran an extension cord from my the power inverter in my vehicle through the window into my house, and it actually saved the reef tank that I had at the time because I was able to run a pump and a heater, and it doesn't take much. A few hundred watts will get you by. And then think about, okay, if you have a like a battery bank or a small inverter, think about prioritize what's most important. I would say, generally speaking, heat is going to your tank is going to cool down slowly, so it's not likely a problem. A bigger problem would be gas exchange. So you want flow through your tank, you want some water movement. So an air pump would probably be the highest priority if you had a limited amount of power to use, whether that's a battery or whatever. So what you'll do is I would place the air stone as far down in the tank as possible. So some of you that may have taller tanks, you're going to need a little bit bigger air pumps. Maybe don't go for the bare minimum like a single tiny little USB pump. Maybe go for something a little bit bigger. And by placing that air stone down in the bottom of the tank, you're going to cause water movement throughout the whole tank and not just breaking the surface. Just breaking the surface will help with the some oxygen exchange. But if you're actually causing flow through the tank by bringing that water from the bottom up and circulating the water from the top down, it's going to work much better. So definitely, thanks for pointing that out, Kenny. That's awesome. There you go. See, easy money. And I mean, I'm sure a 600-watt lithium batteries is probably not cheap, but again, it's a safety measure that you put into place, right? Just like the ink bird's an extra 20 bucks that most people can get by without, but the one time that you do um, utilize it, you'll be glad that you spent the money. How long of a power outage would be necessary for a generator? I would say this depends on a lot of factors, right? Um, so generally speaking, I mean, I've had tanks go 6 hours no power without doing anything to them, and they were just fine. This is going to take into account a lot of variables such as your bioload. If you have a lot more fish in the tank, that tank is going to need something done to it in a shorter time period than a very lightly stocked tank. So, just based on the oxygen consumption of the number of fish in there, if it's a heavily stocked 55 with a bunch of peacock cichlids in it, it may not last super long compared to something like if you have a 55-gallon tank with, say, uh, 20 guppies, just because they're not consuming the oxygen from the water column. And I'd say largely that oxygen is going to be your biggest concern in the situation of a power outage. Like I said, things will cool down slowly. Um, but the oxygen consumption that would be my personal primary concern. So how long of an outage would be necessary for a generator? I don't know. It depends on how many tanks you have. I'd say the more tanks you have, the more I'd lean towards having a generator because the value of that generator is going to increase exponentially. The more livestock you have, because you've got more money tied up into it. The more tanks you have, because there's more potential that money tied up into those. Um, so something to think about. Like I said, takes up a little bit of room. Generators these days are getting smaller and smaller. They're getting a little bit more affordable. It's a cheap insurance. I got down below 50 in my house. We couldn't get into stores or get deliveries for the extended cords. It was tragic. That's unfortunate then. That sucks. I know you guys experienced the ice apocalypse. And like I said, when the power goes out or a day before an ice storm like that hits isn't the time to be thinking about buying a generator. So think about spending that money now. If you need to set some money aside in order to make that happen, maybe you set a little bit of money from your paycheck aside this week, or maybe you sell some guppies or sell some plants and stash that money away and build up over a month or so to get that generator or get that emergency equipment. Excuse me. Um, like Steph said, she's got a battery that's saved her butt a couple times. Debbie asked if you have water flow going in your tank, wouldn't it cool the water down quicker? It would through evaporative cooling and just it moving, it will cool it down quicker. So things that you can keep in mind with this, if you want to keep that tank a little bit warmer, um, a decent heavy blanket, maybe have blankets on hand that you can use to cover the top of that tank largely, and then the top would be my priority because the heat's going to rise, right? So that would be my priority. But you can have a blanket that wraps around the side. If you're in a cold area where you experience power outages often, um, maybe you take the time to actually make specific blanket type covers. Um, so take a heavy blanket and cut it and actually stitch it so that it fits firmly or snugly over that tank, and that'll help keep some of that heat in. Uh, yeah, that sucks. I mean, we've all been there. Just like Kenny was saying, due to life circumstances, he had to bail out on a really high end reef setup, and he lost his ass on it. That's unfortunate. That's something that you can't plan for, right? That's just there are known risks that we take, and you have to understand that risk before you get into something like that, and understand that there's always something that could happen. So a lot of keeping fish is risk management. Are you willing to lose whatever that investment may be? I know people that have bought groups of plicos and they spent $2,000 with the hopes that they'd spawn them and something happened, um, and now they're out $2,000. It's just like the stock market. Only play with what you're willing to lose because it can bite you in the ass. Ba, 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 ba. What else? What else you guys got? We'll give it about 10 minutes here, and then we'll call it quits. Think we've hit some pretty good topics tonight. Appreciate your guys' questions. Been able to we've told a few war stories between Kenny and myself, and now Zen's kind of sharing her experiences. And if you guys have any experiences where something happened and there was a piece of equipment that saved your tanks, or you wish you would have had to save your tanks or to avoid a situation, I'd love to hear those stories because that's how we learn from each other, right? Our own mistakes, and unfortunately, we all make mistakes, but we can learn from others' mistakes as well, and hopefully, uh, that by sharing those stories, sometimes they can be a little kick in the shorts, right? Sometimes it's a mistake that we made ourselves and not something where it was out of our control, like a power outage. So sometimes it can be a little trip to the ego, and sometimes it can be a little embarrassing that we do some stupid stuff. But it's important as hobbyists to help each other, that we share that so that maybe there's something that I did. And by me sharing that story, maybe that sparks something in Debbie's mind or June's mind. Like, hey, I never thought that could happen. Um, I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to learn from Mike's failure and his mistake, and I'm going to avoid that. And that just helps us build up each other a little bit. So I know it sucks telling bad stories sometimes, especially when it's something that we did. But I'd encourage you to not be afraid to share those, and it helps everybody learn. And you can maybe if you share that story, somebody else can take an outsider point of view and look at it, and they can help you analyze it. Maybe you made a mistake and you weren't quite sure where you went wrong, or what you did wrong that you could have done to avoid it. So just getting an outside opinion, and that's why it's important. I always tell people to surround yourself with like-minded people, and surround yourself with as many uh, successful like-minded people as possible, and try to find people that are more successful than you, that have a little more time in the hobby, because they're going to have a lot more stories. And there will always be people that are smarter than you, always people that have more experience, they've done more than you. There's always going to be people below you too. There's always new people entering the hobby every day. Um, so it's important to make friends with people in the hobby, and promote growth in the hobby, and have a positive attitude towards each other. And sometimes, I can be a little bit negative. I'm sure you guys have picked up on that, and I try to catch myself on it. Think about things that uh, would be help the hobby progress and take care of each other. Because at the end of the day, sometimes our spouses don't necessarily see eye to eye with us on our hobbies. Uh, so sometimes our support group that we get with our hobby, it comes from each other. um, and thankfully, with YouTube and the internet and stuff, we are able, to make these communications where we don't have to rely so much on the local club. Although I still highly promote joining a local club, or at least starting a local group of friends, in the hobby. But being online, you've seen how it's awesome how, like, Stevens in Louisiana and Bex and Kyle are in Colorado, but those two, those three, have supported each other even in distance. And then when they meet up at a swap meet or meet up at an event, it's like they were friends the whole time. So it's super cool. Uh, we can do great things to support each other, and I strongly encourage it. Um, then said she had heard that oil heaters are good for fish rooms, because apparently standard radiating heaters will continuously trip the breakers on a generator too. Uh, yeah, so that's to the draw. So an electric heater is going to pull a ton of current. So generally speaking, on our aquariums, right? So the heater usually pulls more current than anything else. Like a small filter is probably going to be like 10, 15 watts. A large canister filter is probably going to be like 40, 50 watts. Or even as like a small heater is 150 watts. That's pulling a lot of juice. That's going to be your primary power consumption. So just like that, an electric like radiant heater, like a little space heater, is going to pull a ton of power. So where you have an oil heater, or something that actually burns a fuel instead of just using electricity to generate that heat, that's not going to consume a lot of electricity, so that it'll be able to sustain that longer, and it won't be such a draw on your generator. And that's where, if you have a limited power source, whether you have a fairly small generator, or you're just using a power inverter like through your car, or you have, like Steph said, a battery. Think about it when you pick up your equipment. If you're picking up a spare air pump to have in this situation, size it appropriately to meet the needs of your tanks, but make sure that your power supply is large enough to power it for a reasonable amount of time. And when I say reasonable amount of time, like, uh, generally most power outages, like, you're talking a lot of times like 12 to 24 hours. So think about that. Think about uh, how much power does this power source offer? If it's a battery, it's going to be limited. If it's something like an inverter or generator, the draw on it will be limited. So think about how much power does this use? How long can I run this piece of equipment with the power source that I have? Because those two will both come into play eventually during those extended power outages. And I know, I don't know, a lot of people use the little USB rechargeable air pumps. And those are handy, I think. If you have a couple tanks, it's not too bad, and they run for a while. But if you've got a bunch of tanks, like, I'd say like 10, you're probably just going to want to look up into to spending the money on a decent, uh, you know, obviously a decent air pump. It's way more efficient to just run one nice big air pump than a bunch of little ones, and then a quality backup power source. And yeah, like I said, then sometimes that happens, and it's unfortunate. And like I said, I'm sorry that happened. Obviously, you learned from it, and I appreciate you sharing your story. Obviously, that sucks, right? That could be potentially be hundreds, thousands of dollars of fish, which is a kick in the nads. Uh, and the only thing we can do when that happens is pick ourselves up, learn from it, and move on and do what we can. So, uh, in the heat of the moment, in that situation where we have something like ice apocalypse, in Texas, and where it's a sudden onset thing, uh, you scramble to do what you can. People like down south, they generally not prepared. But it sucks. Some things are unavoidable. Like ice apocalypse in Texas would be tough. Like ice apocalypse in South Dakota. Well, most South Dakota people expect at least one good ice storm every year, so it makes a little more sense. We're a little more prepared for it. So I know it can suck spending $300-400 on a generator. I'm like, well, I haven't used it in 3 years, so I didn't get my money out of it. Like I said, that one time you do, yeah, and it saves $5,000-10,000 in your fish room. You'll be glad. But I think we're gonna call it a night, guys. We still got a few people here. I think we got 7 or 8 watching. Zen Ginger, June, Stephanie, Debbie. Kenny was here for a little bit. I think he bounced. Austin, if you're still here, appreciate you stopping by. Uh, so yeah, so hopefully you guys learned something, or hopefully if you didn't learn something, I inspired some sort of thought process in your head to think about some different aspects of equipment and stuff, or some different aspects of being prepared, and share that and start discussions with it, because now's the time to start talking about it with people, right? Start asking the questions like, this is how many tanks I have. What pump would you recommend to have as a backup pump, and how would you power it? And start seeing what other people do. um, have those discussions now. Talk about that equipment now. And as always, don't be afraid to ask me a question. I'll give you my opinion. Opinions are like, well, you know how that goes. uh, but it's based largely off experience, and a little bit of just asking questions, and but have those discussions and just talks amongst each other. The Discord's a great place to be. You can ask these questions, and there's usually somebody pretty smart and knowledgeable, more than willing to help in the Discord. So I definitely recommend utilize that tool. It's an excellent option to have. But that's all for now. Thanks again, guys, for stopping by. It really is a pleasure. I love spending time and hanging out with you guys, and I'm glad that you guys took the time out of your day or night to hang out and talk and have a discussion and ask questions and bring up these topics. So I really appreciate it. I just share your experience, help people out, be kind-hearted, and show people the light and help people along their way. Until next time, this is Mike at All Things Fish. Thanks for tuning in, and have a good night.